My cheating wife convinced our kids I'm not their dad, left me for her 13-year secret affair partner. It's been a hectic 5 days, and our minivan has seen a lot of miles. Now, just 20 minutes after getting back home, I find myself on the porch, settled into my favorite old chair with a glass of rich, dark porter, musing over the fact that our twins are experiencing their first taste of independence. Miranda and I have officially become empty nesters, joining the ranks of countless other parents who have gone through the same transition recently, but I'm willing to bet none of them feel as content as I do right now. Since Luke was attending Georgia Tech, our journey kicked off in Atlanta. It was convenient to drop off our rental car there, eliminating the need to keep switching drivers. The next day, we flew our daughter Kelly to Gainesville for her new adventure as a gator, while we continued eastward to Daytona Beach for some relaxation in the sun. Those 3 days were filled with more closeness than we've ever experienced in our marriage. Miranda was absolutely insatiable. Starting our family young, when we were just 18, means that at 36, our energy levels and libidos are still going strong. On our way back home, we made a quick pit stop at a deserted truck stop where Miri, amusingly, tried to convince me that she had intentionally left her underwear behind. Now, as I relaxed in my chair, lost in pleasant thoughts, Miranda headed upstairs to freshen up with a shower. I was taken aback when I heard the hairdryer kick in, a sound typically reserved for her prepping for work or a night out. After the hairdryer's hum faded, I heard Miranda's footsteps and the clack of her heels in the kitchen, an unusual choice since she typically wore rubber-soled slippers or went barefoot around the house. Before I could ponder these oddities further, she called out to me, "Alan, honey, can you join me for a moment? I need to talk to you." Waking from my reverie, I rose from my chair, empty glass in hand, and replied cheerfully, "On my way, darling." Entering the kitchen, I was surprised to find Miranda seated at the table, looking fresh in a new blouse and clean jeans. She poured me a mug of freshly brewed coffee and set it down in front of her spot. Miranda appeared focused and a bit tense, leaving me puzzled as to what her serious demeanor signified. Slowly, I took the seat she had clearly reserved for me, awaiting her explanation. "What's up, Miri?" I asked warmly, taking the cup from her and sipping the strong, hot drink. "I'm leaving you, Alan," she said calmly and casually, grabbing a thick envelope. "I've got divorce papers here for you to go over and sign." She kept talking, but I was completely shocked and couldn't find any words. It felt like a sudden, deafening blow out of nowhere. I'd never boxed before, but in that moment, I felt like a boxer reeling from a missed uppercut and a heavy knockdown. She pushed the envelope toward me, continuing to deliver monotone statements, each one hitting me like a piledriver to the brain. She seemed completely unaware of the shock I was in. "All the divorce terms are spelled out in these papers. I'm not asking for anything from you. You can do whatever you want with my things here. Our savings are split, bills paid up to today, and I've canceled all joint credit cards. I've updated my address with everyone who needs to know. You can get more details from your lawyer. If you need anything from me, only contact me through my lawyer." Taking a breath, Miranda carried on in her usual dispassionate, businesslike tone. "I also obtained a restraining order because I don't want any further contact with you once I leave. It's in this envelope as well. Additionally, I've changed my phone number and email address, and all my previous accounts are closed." She didn't anticipate a response from me, and I couldn't manage to say anything. I just sat there, silent and motionless, staring blankly at her across the table. The coffee in front of me, barely touched, emitted a faint wisp of steam as it cooled. "Please," she cautioned, tapping her well-manicured glossy nail on the tabletop, "don't try to involve the children by extracting information from them. They're aware of what's going on and won't assist you. The same goes for my parents." Miranda, no longer indifferent or preoccupied with her hands, finally directed her cold gaze straight into my eyes. "I know you'll want answers, Alan, so I'll just say it. I've been with Dan for the past 13 years, and now I intend to make him my real, full-time partner. I loved you, Alan. I just love Dan more. He's endured and waited long enough to deserve me. So today, I'm ending things with you, and now I'll belong to him alone. That's all. Goodbye, Alan." Miranda concluded her speech, stood, and made her way to the exit. It wasn't until she picked up the bag by the door and opened it that I found my voice, managing to croak out just one word. "Why?" Still devoid of emotion, she paused, turned to meet my gaze, and uttered only 2 words. "Sandy Thompson." With that, she stepped over the threshold, slamming the door behind her. In the ensuing silence, all I heard were the faint clicks of her shoes, the muffled thud of a car door, and the gradually fading roar of an engine as she drove away, disappearing into the distance. That marked the last time I saw or spoke to Miranda for the next 16 months. At work, Dan Roberts was like a father figure to me, my closest friend for the past 18 years. Miri and Dan's wife, Lisa, had bonded during their pregnancies, both being close in age, Lisa at 22 and Miri just over 18. Additionally, their daughter Cassie was born a day after our twins, a coincidence that seemed like fate. This initial connection blossomed into a deep friendship, making our families practically inseparable. We spent weekends together, living just 2 blocks apart until our falling out. The moment that brought the twins into our lives occurred while both Miranda and I were in college. Miri had always aspired to study business or business management, while I pursued mathematics with the help of a partial scholarship, also playing on the college baseball team. At that time, I hadn't yet determined my future path. However, everything changed when Miri informed me of her pregnancy, necessitating that I set aside my aspirations and find employment to support our growing family. Our parents were incredibly supportive, taking charge of arranging and financing our wedding. Within 2 months, I became the sole focus of my parents' attention as their only child. They had welcomed me into the world later in life, approaching their 42nds, and considered me a precious blessing after years of longing for a child. Miri had an older brother, Tom, who was 10 years her senior. Their familial bond was distant, as Tom left for college when Miri was just 8 years old, rarely returning home thereafter. Tragically, Tom passed away in a peculiar car accident shortly after graduating from college. This event prompted Miranda's parents to shift their focus entirely to their only remaining child, mirroring the devotion my own parents had shown to me. As a wedding present, my parents officially handed over the deeds to our longtime family residence, as they themselves prepared to relocate further south with retirement on the horizon. I secured a position selling insurance policies at a local firm, quickly acclimating to the industry and feeling right at home. While the starting salary for a new agent was modest, lucrative commissions from successful deals had the potential to nearly double my earnings, albeit at the cost of long hours. Typically 12-hour days and occasional weekends. In the months leading up to the twins' arrival, Miri took on a part-time role as a secretary at an office, aiming to further her education while balancing her studies online. It was during this time that her parents' support proved invaluable, as they stepped in to help care for the newborns and eagerly visited to spend time with their grandchildren whenever possible. Tragedy struck 3 years later with the incident involving Sandy Thompson. Despite the challenges, I found success in my career, and my company nominated me for Salesperson of the Year for the North Carolina region. Our small yet growing company, which had recently become a market leader and was later acquired by a national corporation, believed in my potential. Along with a $2,500 bonus, I was awarded an all-expenses-paid trip to Washington, D.C., headquarters for a gala ceremony and dinner where the year's top seller would be announced, followed by 2 additional days to enjoy at leisure. For Miri and me, it marked our first time leaving the city together without the twins, and we were eagerly anticipating the trip. However, 2 days before our departure, everything unraveled. Firstly, Luke was diagnosed with whooping cough, followed by Kelly falling ill the next day. Despite the setbacks, my presence at the ceremony was mandatory. With a heavy heart, Miri bid me farewell on Friday morning, urging me to try and enjoy the next few days. Arriving an hour before the gala commenced, I checked in and informed them that I would be attending solo. After grooming and donning my rented tuxedo, I descended into the grand hall and located my seat, finding myself beside Sandy Thompson from our Little Rock office. While most attendees were in their 32nds or older, Sandy was only a year my senior at 21. This was her first full year with the company. Prior to this event, my experience with drinks was limited to a few beers, but the open bar at the dinner offered wine. As far as I recall, I only had a couple of glasses. When the awards were announced, I was utterly astonished to hear my name called as Salesperson of the Year. Stunned, I ascended the stage to receive a trophy cup and a $10,000 check amidst thunderous applause. Upon returning to my seat, I was graciously gifted a bottle of champagne from our superior. Honestly, the rest of the evening passed in a blur until I woke up at 5:00 a.m. The next morning, finding myself lying next to the enticingly undressed Sandy Thompson. I was overwhelmed with fear, a pounding headache, and a severe hangover. I stumbled to my room, hastily packed my belongings, and was on my way home within 20 minutes. Miri was understandably surprised to see me return 2 hours later. As expected, she was not pleased when I confessed that I had gotten drunk at the gala dinner and woke up in another woman's bed the next morning. She abruptly cut me off, refusing to hear my explanations or excuses. The only question she had was the woman's name. Before I could respond, she announced that she was going to stay with her parents for a few days, quickly packed a bag, grabbed the car keys, and fled without a word, leaving me with the children for 3 days. Miri ignored my calls, seemingly unwilling to even hear my voice. I returned to work on Tuesday after dropping the kids off at daycare. When I returned home that evening, Miri was already there, pretending as if nothing had happened between us. Any attempt to discuss the situation was met with a stern warning that she would leave with the children if I ever brought it up again. That night, she initiated lovemaking, but it was mechanical and lacked the closeness we once shared. It took many more months for that feeling to return, but eventually, it did. At her request, we never mentioned the incident again. The next year, Miri graduated and earned her business degree, eager to find a job that would utilize her newfound knowledge. Our bond with Dan and Lisa flourished, leading us to spend every weekend together, unless work obligations intervened. Despite this, our wives continued to meet and spend time together, albeit with some difficulty, as Dan and Lisa moved 15 miles away to be closer to Dan's workplace. Interestingly, Miri's parents soon followed suit, relocating to the same area to rent a larger apartment that could accommodate their growing family and provide more space for their grandchildren. Additionally, they began caring for Robert's daughter, Cassie, granting Dan and Lisa a bit more flexibility. As Dan's company expanded rapidly, they found themselves in need of an office manager and a personal assistant for Dan himself. This role seemed tailor-made for Miri, and after impressing the managers during her interviews, she landed the job and thrived in it. Given her long-standing connection with the company and close relationship with Dan, she humorously earned the nickname Dan's work wife. This dynamic persisted for 7 years until tragedy struck. Lisa passed away suddenly from a brain aneurysm. Shockingly, this devastating event occurred on a day when she was visiting me, as was customary when Dan and Miri had to travel for business together. The loss deeply affected us all, but Dan bore the brunt of the grief. Overwhelmed by the tragedy, he struggled to cope alone and care for his 11-year-old daughter. So the plan was for Miranda to visit the Roberts' house a few times a week after work to ensure everything was tidy and prepare dinners that could be easily reheated. That's how Miri explained it to me. Months later, as I was about to leave the garage with the final box for my minivan, I paused to see Miri's car pulling into the driveway. It was her first return since that memorable conversation in the kitchen, where she coldly handed me the divorce papers. Naturally, seeing her today was the last thing I expected. I greeted her as she got out of the car. "Miranda, aren't you violating the restraining order by being here?" I asked calmly. "The order ceased to apply on the day we divorced," she dismissed, toying with her keyring. "How are you holding up?" I shrugged. "Taking things one day at a time. Would you like some coffee?" I called out, already heading back to the house. "That would be nice," she replied, following me inside. By now, the house was nearly empty, save for a few boxes and a lone dining table in the kitchen. Most of the furniture and household items had been sold to neighbors and acquaintances over the past couple of days, with the remaining items destined for the landfill. A colleague's son had volunteered to handle this task, along with his wife and friend, despite my attempts to refuse their help. A solitary greeting card sat on the mantelpiece in the living room. Since I had recently turned 38, my CO workers had gathered to send warm congratulations, along with another card wishing me luck in my new home, already packed among my belongings. The company I devoted over 19 years to had always treated me well, so leaving behind good. Friends filled me with sadness and regret. Yet, it was a necessary step. There was nothing tethering me there anymore. With coffee brewed and mugs in hand, we settled into the same seats where we had sat face-to-face 16 months prior. "So, what brings you back into my company on this lovely day?" I inquired with detached curiosity, unable to fathom why Miri had returned after abruptly severing ties between us. "Can't you guess?" she retorted, visibly displeased. "The kids received letters from you about your move. Why not just call them instead of sending registered mail?" "Well, actually, I did both," I clarified, explaining that it was the only way to ensure they received the news. Otherwise, they might have thought I vanished without a word. I chuckled, then corrected myself. "Actually, I reached out to Kelly. I can't call Luke." "Why not?" Miri asked, puzzled. "I don't have his number," I sighed. "The truth is, the kids don't want to stay in touch with me," I admitted, noticing her skeptical expression. "I'll just have to prove to my ex-wife how our kids really feel," I added, grabbing my phone from the table and dialing Kelly's number on speaker. After 10 long beeps, it went to voicemail. I ended the call and looked at Miri. "Couldn't you try calling her? Would you mind?" "Kelly might just be busy," she replied, making excuses but still retrieving her phone and dialing our daughter's number, putting it on speaker. Interestingly, her call was promptly answered after the second ring. "Hi, Mom. How's it going?" Kelly's cheerful voice greeted. "I'm good, honey. What are you up to?" Well, right now, Cassie and I are just hanging out. We have a party later, so we're just lounging around conserving energy. My daughter responded with a chuckle and a hint of laziness. Have you heard anything from your father? Miri asked, glancing at me with a meaningful raised eyebrow. Yeah, I spoke to him last night. He said he talked to you and promised he'd pick up Cassie and me today. Yeah, in about 10 minutes. I think he's going to grab Luke later too before we all head to the party, Kelly chirped. My heart sank at the sound of my daughter calling him Dad. Miri, always perceptive, noticed how much that thoughtless comment from Kelly stung me. Clenching my fists, I leaned back in my chair and stared blankly at the ceiling. You mean Dan? Miri asked incredulously, as if unable to believe what she had just heard. Well, yeah, Mom, who else? Kelly continued to giggle. By the way, he really likes it when I call him Dad. And besides, you know he'll officially be my father in 3 weeks, she reminded her mother. Believe it or not, my ex-wife was set to remarry in 3 weeks. They even sent me an invitation to their celebration. Yeah, right, like I'd actually attend. Kellyanne, when was the last time you spoke to your biological father? Miri impatiently inquired, her voice carrying stern undertones. Oh, Mom, I don't recall. Maybe a few weeks ago, Kelly responded, her tone shifting from amused to concerned upon sensing something amiss in her mother's voice. I opened my call log and displayed it to her, revealing my numerous unsuccessful attempts to reach our daughter. Truth be told, none of my children had called me since Miri left, not a single call in almost a year and a half. That's odd to hear because I'm sitting right next to him now and I saw firsthand how he tried to call you just a minute before I did. What's going on, Kelly? Miri questioned with an even sterner tone. Oh, it's nothing, Mom. I just forgot, our daughter replied, her voice confused and sheepish through the speaker. I just want to remind you, her mother said sharply, you only have one father and it's not Dan. We'll discuss this further later, young lady, she promised, concluding the conversation decisively and ending the call. Clearly upset, Miranda turned off the phone and pushed it away. So, why don't you have Luke's number? She pressed again. FYI, Dan made sure the boy had a new phone and memorized his number within hours of his old phone being stolen. If only I had known, I shrugged. Listen, don't be too strict with the children. Apparently their love and affection for me vanished after just over a year, I said, smiling darkly as I intertwined my fingers tightly. You heard your daughter. She's happy that she'll now have a new father. You know the old saying, out of sight, out of mind. Well, apparently for Kelly, I'm already a non-entity. Pointing to my long list of calls on my phone, I continued, as you can see, I no longer have anything to do with the children. And as far as I know, in 3 weeks, I'll be officially replaced by the real dad. The truth in my comments seemed to hurt her, but it needed to be said. Since you left, I've probably talked to them for no more than an hour, despite my efforts. God, I really tried, I said bitterly, remembering a typical moment when I got tickets to the Braves game on opening day of the season. I was so excited, but when I called Luke with the news, he said he was too busy to have fun. Sighing, I looked up at Miri's frozen figure opposite me. Later, I found out he and Dan went to that very game, buying tickets at the last minute. Well, if that's what they want, I can't force them to choose otherwise. We fell silent for a moment, lost in our thoughts, before Miri changed the subject with a quiet cough. So, you're moving out of here to be closer to your parents? She asked. Not exactly, she replied. I have to leave so I can look after my mother now. She needs constant care and attention. Oh my God, did something happen to her? How does your father deal with this? You never mentioned any problems before, I said, concern evident in my voice. At least Miri really cared about my parents, I thought to myself. Mom has advanced Alzheimer's disease, she said solemnly. It's pretty bad because she hardly remembers anything 90% of the time. And as for Dad, we buried him just over 3 weeks ago. The hospital said it was a heart attack, but personally I think he died from a broken heart, suffering too much from disappointment and pain. Oh no, my ex-wife sobbed, bursting into tears. How do you know it was a broken heart, and why didn't you call us? Of course I called, I objected wearily. And to be honest, that was the last time I talked to Kelly. It was the day after Thanksgiving. That's when I found out Luke had a new number, and our conversation with Kelly lasted no more than a minute. She hastily blurted out that she was incredibly busy and would call me back soon. It's a pity she never did, neither that day nor a week later. I called her every day for a couple of weeks until I finally understood the reason. It's ironic that my kids blocked me on Facebook, but not my dad, I said sarcastically. I later found out that when Kelly told me she was very busy, it was because she was going to the Black Friday sale that day with you and Grandma Roberts. As for how I can know that my father died of a broken heart, that's easy. I never told my parents about our divorce. Yes, I was going to do it sooner or later, but I never could. I admitted, feeling tears welling up in my eyes. Brushing them away, I took a deep breath and continued. When you left, I went to them the next weekend to talk about what happened between us face to face. When I got there, I discovered how bad my mother's condition had become. Dad had told me before how forgetful she was sometimes, but since I last saw them the Christmas before last, her condition had seriously deteriorated. You obviously never knew about this because not once in the last 3 years have you been able to go with me to their place when I took the children there. I couldn't resist directly hinting at those compelling reasons that, as we both know well now, prevented Miri from accompanying me and the children every time. Because of my mother's illness, I didn't have the right to bring this news to both of them then, and every week it became more and more difficult to do this. After Thanksgiving dinner, once we had settled Mom for the night, Dad began pressing me with questions. It had been over a year since he'd heard from you or the kids, so reluctantly, I told him the truth about our split and your departure. Miri, tense as a bowstring, sat across from me, elbows sharp on the table, hands covering her mouth. Tears glistened in her eyes, and her trembling eyelashes were the only signs of life on her pale face. The next morning, I found Dad in his favorite chair, clutching our family photo, still damp from his tears. Our divorce broke his heart, Miri. Mom and Dad were married for 52 years. He was old-fashioned and had hoped we'd be together until end of life parted us. Tears streamed down my cheeks as I recounted that dark day. Rising abruptly, I turned to the window, staring at the pale blue sky dotted with rare clouds. Miri sniffled, and quiet sobs echoed behind me. Leaning my throbbing forehead against the cool glass, a minute later I spoke softly again. It was at the funeral that I truly felt the weight of my loneliness. Only a few neighbors and the chaplain attended Dad's farewell. Nobody else came. I couldn't even bring Mom because she wouldn't understand what was happening. It was only a week or two after the funeral, once Mom had recovered somewhat, that I mustered the courage to tell her that Dad was gone. But it pains her every time she's reminded of it, so now, when she asks, I just tell her he stepped out for a while and will be back soon. Miri openly wept, but my tears had dried up long ago. I had been utterly devastated emotionally in the preceding weeks. My gaze wandered aimlessly around the room until it landed on the solitary greeting card on the mantelpiece. Miri, with her tear-streaked eyes, followed my gaze and evidently noted what had caught my attention. I continued speaking in the same detached, distant tone. You know, maybe I'm alone now, and even my own mother fails to recognize me, but I owe her a debt for bringing me into this world. So yes, I'm packing up here to be there for her for however long she has left. Turning to my ex-wife, I straightened up, crossing my arms over my chest. A bitter, sarcastic grimace colored my final words to the woman I had loved deeply during our years together. Isn't it incredible, the fallout from your actions and how many lives it affected? You shattered our marriage, you severed my bond with my children, and to top it off, you tore apart my family. I concluded my speech, unable to contain the anger and accusatory tone I had vowed not to reveal, but it poured out nonetheless. Don't you dare blame me for all of this, Miranda shot back, rising from her seat. Unlike you, Dan is committed to me. And let's not forget that you replaced me with Sandy Thompson, she added, her face flushing as she pointed an accusatory finger at me. Her accusation caught me off guard, and instead of a defensive response, I burst into laughter, tears streaming down my cheeks. Absolutely, I replied, barely catching my breath. Let's not overlook Sandy Thompson, the reason you spent over 15 years meticulously plotting your revenge. I vividly recall that evening when you sternly warned me never to mention her name in this house, threatening to take the children and leave me forever if I did. My ex-wife raised her chin arrogantly, crossing her arms over her chest in defiance, her gaze fixed firmly on me. Well, Miri, now that you've followed through on all your threats, I believe that ship has sailed. But I still want to make one thing clear once and for all: I never laid a finger on Sandy Thompson, I declared, emphatically, feeling a surge of relief as the words left my lips. Meeting Miranda's widened eyes, filled with shock and confusion, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders as I continued in a calmer tone. When I woke up in her bed that morning, I was still dressed in the same tuxedo from the night before. Nothing happened between us. Do you really expect me to believe this fairy tale? Miri retorted, dripping with poisonous sarcasm. Yes, I do expect you to believe me, I replied firmly. I've never lied to you before, and I certainly have no reason to start now, especially when everything between us has long been over, I added, regaining my composure. I don't care, she snapped dismissively, sounding more like Kelly than the woman I once knew. For some reason, her indifferent response irked me. Although I could tell she didn't believe me, it was oddly important to me that she did. I grabbed my phone and dialed my old office, motioning for Miranda to stay put and not interrupt. After just a couple of rings, Jane, the receptionist, answered promptly. "Hey Jane, it's Alan Dow." "Oh, hi Alan. Have you finished sorting everything out?" my old friend replied cheerfully, likely gearing up for a big move. "It'll be strange around here without you," she sighed with regret. "Yeah, everything's already packed. I just wanted to chat with my old pal one last time before hitting the road. Listen, I'm trying to get in touch with a colleague at the Little Rock office. I'm not even sure if she's still there, so I was wondering if you could check the system and see if Sandy Thompson is still around." "Sure thing, Alan. Hang on a sec," Jane responded promptly, and for a few moments the only sound on the line was the rapid clicking of keys. After a brief pause, she came back on. "Yep, she's still with us at the same branch in Little Rock. Do you want her number or should I patch you through directly?" "Oh, thanks a bunch for your help. Just put me through to her line. And Jane, sweetheart, take care of yourself, and if Paul ever decides to put a ring on it, I expect an invite," I joked. "Absolutely, Alan," Jane giggled. "And don't forget about us either, okay? Well, patching you through now." "Thanks, Jane," I said, ready to talk. As Miri listened in on our casual chat, her brow furrowed, but her gaze remained fixed on me. "Hello, Sandy Thompson on the line," a voice I hadn't heard in years announced. "Hi, Sandy. It's Alan Dow from the Greenville office. I'm not sure if you remember me." "Good Lord, Alan Dow, how could I forget? I've been dreaming of you for years, the man I wanted but never got." "And now you're calling me out of the blue?" Sandy exclaimed, laughing. "So, how the hell have you been?" she asked without pausing for an answer. "It's like telepathy, because believe it or not, I was just thinking about you recently. It's been, 16 years since we last spoke? At that gala reception. Where we first met, remember? We bumped into each other at a few other events afterward, but never got a chance to catch up properly. But you know how hectic those crowded gatherings, important meetings, and all the other fuss can be." "Of course I remember our first encounter in Washington," I interjected. "Actually, it's been 17 years, I corrected with a chuckle. Though besides the award ceremony itself, that night's a bit of a blur for me." "Oh, Alan, you were a riot that evening," Sandy reminisced, her voice filled with laughter. "What do you remember?" she asked, still chuckling. "Well, after my clumsy thank you speech, I remember leaving the stage, and then I think we were still sipping champagne at the table. But after that, it's all a bit fuzzy. It was probably the first and last time I got that drunk," I admitted, feeling a bit embarrassed. Sandy's hearty laughter echoed through the phone. "Oh, you were quite the character by the end of the night. Though, honestly, compared to some others, you didn't drink that much," she teased. "Well, if you want honesty, Alan, I'll give it to you straight," she continued, her voice sly. "Go on, Miss Thompson, lay it on me," I replied, ready for her frankness. It was quite amusing to chime in with my former colleague. "I have to confess, I had my eye on you that evening, even though I knew I had some serious competition from all the single ladies gathered there." "Oh, absolutely," Sandy chuckled. "You were like a tall, dark, handsome magnet drawing all the attention. It was like watching bees buzzing around a pot of honey." Sandy's infectious laughter made me join in, though I couldn't help but sneak a glance at Miri, who listened to Sandy's reminiscences with pursed lips, her expression turning sour when Sandy mentioned dragging me onto the dance floor. Then, quite accidentally, I swear I placed my hand below and felt how firm and substantial you were, Sandy continued, laughing. "Phew, things were heating up, weren't they?" "Ha, yeah, I nearly keeled over from that," I chuckled. Although being called Miri all evening was a bit awkward, it did show me how devoted you were to your wife. By around 11, you were muttering, "Miri, dear," again, and then simply passed out in your chair. When the party wrapped up after midnight and everyone retired to their rooms, you were still there in the hallway. "So I enlisted the help of the night porter to get you to bed," Sandy recounted. "I certainly didn't recall all of that," I remarked, listening intently to Sandy's account of that pivotal night, which marked the beginning of the end for Miranda and me. The tricky part was, no one knew which room you were assigned, and the hotel computers were offline for a scheduled update or something. I didn't delve too deeply into it. Long story short, the only logical solution at the time was to bring you to my room. And let me tell you, it was no easy feat. "Moving a guy your size, especially when you were barely conscious," Sandy explained. With a pause on the line, there was some rustling on the other end of the line, then Sandy spoke again. "Sorry about that. I took a couple of sips of water. All these memories have made me a bit feverish and parched," she confessed with a laugh. "So where did I leave off? Oh, right. Well, I have to confess, at that moment I was feeling a bit mischievous," she admitted, her voice tinged with embarrassment. "I mentioned earlier how I accidentally felt your, manhood when the receptionist and I were maneuvering you onto the bed. It was just a fleeting touch, but I immediately realized that you were not only tall but also quite well endowed, if you catch my drift." she chuckled nervously into the phone. Unfortunately, you nearly passed out as we were getting you into the room, and then you just collapsed on the bed, muttering something unintelligible. You know, even though I was tempted, Sandy sighed, I couldn't bring myself to do anything with someone who was practically unconscious. It just seemed wrong and against my principles. Nevertheless, I was a bit tipsy myself that night and feeling rather, well, aroused. So I decided to undress and lie down next to you, hoping that when you woke up and saw me, it might spark something between us. She sighed involuntarily once more. But clearly my little ploy didn't work, because when I woke up in the morning, you were already gone, and despite my inquiries, no one had seen you for the rest of the weekend. So all I can say, Alan, is that your wife must be a very fortunate woman. Miri, her eyes widening in shock, covered her mouth with both hands as the gravity of her actions hit her like a thunderbolt. I must admit, at that moment, I felt no sympathy for my ex-wife, as her own rash decisions and arrogance were the root cause of our marriage's downfall. The subsequent calculated planning and years of scheming, aimed solely at getting revenge on me, only served to reinforce this belief. It was clear to me that I never truly knew the real Miri. Oh, about that, I replied. Now she's my ex-wife, and if I knew then what I know now, I probably would have taken you up on that tempting offer, I chuckled, answering Sandy. She laughed heartily. Well, honey, you're about 7 years too late if you were hoping to rekindle our connection. Now, I'm a very happily married woman with 2 wonderful children. I still use the last name Thompson at the office because all my clients know it and are accustomed to it. Actually, officially, I'm Sandy Roberts. I met Robert 8 years ago, and he was the first person after you who managed to find a way to my heart, she said with a touch of sentiment. A crease formed on Miri's tense forehead as she gripped the edges of the table, her face contorting into a pained grimace. She stared fixedly at the phone on the table, as if it were a coiled viper ready to strike. Observing Miranda's reaction, I was perplexed, as I couldn't quite grasp its significance. By the way, it's because of Rob that I thought about you, buddy. Isn't that strange? She laughed. Well, the thing is, his older brother Dan is getting married in a couple of weeks, and his fiancée, named Andy like you, has the last name Dow. So I wondered if she was your relative, because you're the only person named Dow among the people I know. Now I understood Miri's reaction. I can't say that so. Among my relatives, there's no one named Andy, I said with a hint of irony, glancing at Miri. Although, come to think of it, I remember the only relative I knew with such a name was still in high school. It's been so long that I almost forgot about it, I grinned, looking pointedly at Miranda, who blushed and looked away, lips pursed in embarrassment. Huh, I really didn't know the real her anymore. But no one would mistake Andy for a guy now. She's gorgeous. She has amazing children, Kelly and Luke, who are now in college. Kelly and Dan's daughter, Cassie, are best friends and share a room in Florida. They were both bridesmaids in my wedding, and Luke was Rob's usher. He did a great job preparing the ceremony and entertaining the guests, I reminisced. Yes, a great guy, let me tell you. Sandy's last words made me ponder as I mechanically assented to her. Her tone grew more serious, and she began speaking more quietly. Actually, Alan, to be honest, I don't think they should get married because even if they go through with it, their marriage is doomed from the start. I was surprised. Why do you think so? What could stop them since they've been together for so long? Miri, being directly involved, was even more astonished than I was. Her eyebrows shot up, mouth agape, as she leaned forward tensely. Lord, Alan, because they're both serial cheaters. I mean, Dan also cheated on his first wife, Lisa, with Andy. I don't know how or why he did it, much less why he did it. Lisa, I assure you, was also stunning. Although I never actually met her, I saw her photographs. Anyway, Andy and I had a frank conversation about this one day, and she told me that her husband and children understand that she has a husband at work and a husband at home. She explained how she divided her time between the two of them, while her husband at home had a similar arrangement with a woman he worked with. Can you imagine such a relationship? Yeah, I muttered, unsuccessfully trying to catch Miranda's stubbornly elusive gaze as she avoided looking into my eyes. Her cheeks, neck, and even part of her chest were flushed a deep shade of red, matching the intensity of her embarrassment. I made it clear to Rob that I would not hesitate to confront him if he ever entertained such thoughts. Sandy shared her firm stance on this matter with confident resolve, then casually dropped a bombshell, unwittingly, targeting my ex. Well, Dan still has someone on his side despite his relationship with Andy. That seems to be his modus operandi. I believe this dog always has a backup plan, she snorted. His current girlfriend's name is Tilly, and he sees her every time he's in Chicago. According to what Rob told me, apparently, he arranges these business trips specifically to visit her every couple of weeks. Observing Miri's reaction, I noticed her complexion shift from bright red to, first, pale, then even a hint of green. Leaning on the table, she silently struggled for air, seeming on the brink of vomiting right then and there. Sandy continued to enthusiastically relay the latest updates from my former inner circle. Damn, I doubt they would have tied the knot if his bosses hadn't insisted he marry Andy after her ex sued the company following their divorce. Can you believe it, Alan? Her husband at home had a completely different take on their relationship and wouldn't tolerate the chaos. Some men still have integrity, huh? Rob confided that the company had to cough up a hefty sum to settle the matter. $100 grand. Just great, I thought to myself. And on top of that, they gave Dan an ultimatum. He has to clean up the mess or they'll kick him out. What do you think? Not exactly the ideal foundation for starting a life together, is it? Continue cheating on your bride while staring down the barrel of a loaded weapon. Miri sprang up, knocking over a chair as she stumbled into the bathroom, where seconds later, I heard her retching. I couldn't blame her. After today's revelations, her carefully constructed world had been shattered and literally flushed down the drain. The Dan she believed to be honest, loving, and faithful turned out to be a fraud, but thankfully that was no longer my concern. I conversed with Sandy for a few more minutes, during which she affectionately shared stories about her children and inquired about my plans. I informed her that, based on my former company's recommendation, I was applying for a position at an insurance branch near my mother's house. Instead of the usual insurance sales, the job involved investigating suspicious insurance cases, an intriguing and fresh challenge for me. While the pay wouldn't match my previous earnings, it would still comfortably meet my needs. Additionally, the new role came with a personal office and assistant, signaling a positive step forward in my career. As Miranda returned, visibly exhausted, I concluded my talk with Sandy, exchanging contact details and pledging to stay in touch occasionally. After bidding farewell to Sandy and ending the call, I turned to Miri. My ex-wife appeared visibly distressed, her face damp, pale, and forlorn, with most of her meticulously applied makeup smudged or washed away. In just 15 minutes, Miranda seemed to have aged years before my eyes. You look exhausted, I remarked sympathetically as she slumped into a chair, burying her head in her arms. This time her distress felt genuine. I am, Alan, I really am, she murmured, her voice heavy with exhaustion. Listen, I'm pressed for time. I need to pursue a lead while it's still fresh. By morning, I should be in Brunswick, I replied, glancing at my watch briefly. The drive from here to Brunswick typically took about 6 hours without breaks, but I anticipated making a couple of stops along the way. All these boxes are yours. They contain all the clothes, photographs, and other stuff you left. I gestured towards the packages piled up in the corridor near the entrance. I plan to send them to you next week, but since you're here, I can help by loading them into your car if you'd like, I offered in a composed tone, guided by the enduring politeness instilled in me by my upbringing. Actually, can I ask you a big favor? She murmured softly, lacking the courage to meet my gaze. Can I stay here for the night? I don't think I could go back home there right now. I pondered for a moment, idly playing with a set of keys on my finger before selecting a couple and placing them on the table in front of her. Why not? Here are your keys, and you have my permission. Stay. But when you leave, you'll need to drop them off at the real estate office. Consider yourself warned, I informed Miri. New tenants are arriving on Monday, so you have a full 9 days here if you need them. This Sunday, some people will come to help me get rid of unnecessary items and clean the apartment. Utilities will be operational until Monday. Finally, I scanned the room once more and mentally chided myself. Approaching the mantelpiece, I retrieved a greeting card left behind by my thoughtful former colleagues from my previous job. In my new abode, their genuine warmth and kindness will continue to uplift me. Now all that's left is to bid a final farewell to my ex. All right, it's all done. Take care, Miri. I really must be off. Goodbye. I hope we never cross paths again. As I exited, I cast one last glance at the woman I once loved wholeheartedly. All that lingers in my mind is the image of a broken figure, shoulders slumped at the table, overcome with painful sobs.
My wife cheated while I was battling depression, so I told everyone and exposed her lies. I, 37 male, have been married to my wife, Daphne, 36 female, for 9 years now, but we've known each other since high school. Needless to say, she's one of the people on the planet who knows the most about me, and I can also say that I know a whole lot about her, having grown into adulthood together. For the sake of telling the story publicly, let me just say that her name is Daphne. It breaks my heart to even need to ask for advice on this matter, but I honestly don't know what to do. And my mental state isn't helping at all. I might need to give you all a bit of background so you can understand things a lot better. I don't want to give too many details, but I had a very rough time growing up, if that's not an understatement. I grew up with a mother addicted to drugs, and a great father who met his end due to junkie friends of my mother's. I was the one who found him and had to call, and I don't know if I can ever fully appreciate the extent to which that scarred me. I will be honest and say that I grew up resenting my mother, and women in general, very strongly. I entered foster care with a very kind foster family, and I was unnecessarily a jerk to many of the people in the house. But with time, their love softened me, though I was still holding on to a lot of pain. Quite naturally, I started seeing a therapist very early in my life because I've been dealing with a lot of mental health issues, but I always try to stay positive and fight through things. Meeting Daphne in high school was also a major boost in my happiness, and we were friends for several years before the notion of anything romantic even started between us. Again, I was extremely resentful towards women, and I think having a healthy relationship with Daphne sort of helped me push out of that. Anyway, we both graduated high school and went to the same college, where we both graduated once again. Honestly, everyone could tell that we'd likely end up together, but I guess, trying to be the edgy young adult that I used to be, I would deny it and act oblivious to even the mere possibility of ending up with her. About 2 years after graduating from college, I officially asked her to be my girlfriend. I proposed to her a year later, and 9 years ago, we got married. Daphne wasn't there through the absolute hardest times of my life, but she's always known about my mental health struggles, and she has been there to witness some of my hardest battles. I've always apologized for the way I might treat her in those moments or the way she needs to baby me, but she's always been so kind, and she's always said that she doesn't mind. I even asked her at several points in our relationship whether she was sure about being burdened with me and my problems, but she always claimed that she was, and that she'd go the entire way with me. I think that's enough background. You should be able to understand what I have to say with this much background, so let me try my best to tell it. The real problem started about 4 months ago when I was dealing with a pretty bad episode of depression. Honestly, as much as I push forward in life, some of the things that happened way back in the past still have a pretty strong hold on me. And it's hard for me to completely let go of them no matter how many therapy sessions I choose to attend. Though bad episodes have become fewer and farther apart the older that I've gotten, that episode lasted about 5 days. Usually, Daphne is with me as much as she can be, but it was very clear that something was very different this time around. She stuck around the first 2 days, but halfway through the third day she seemed cold, and she told me that she had something that she had to do. I wasn't in the headspace to really inquire about what it was that she had to do, so she left and came back much later in the night. I'm not too sure what the time was, though. The same thing happened the next 2 days. It was the final day that I noticed she came back around 1:00 a.m. I didn't have much to say about it though, again because of how I was feeling. It was only when I was fully out of the whole thing that I started to think about it with a clear head. I've known her for about 2 decades, and that was very unusual behavior, so it stayed on my mind for quite some time. To be honest, cheating wasn't part of what jumped into my head because you think that you know people, right? I considered bringing it up, but for some reason, I decided to let the whole thing go, which was likely a dumb move. Now, it wasn't until about 2 months later when I had a really bad day that I realized that something seemed to be up. Just like the other time, she basically disappeared halfway through the day, and I knew that something was really wrong at this point. It made the day much worse because it seemed like Daphne was avoiding me, which was very unusual behavior from her. Fortunately, this was just a bad day and not a proper episode of depression, so I bounced back by the end of the day, though she wasn't back by that point. As soon as she stepped back into the house, I paused the game that I was playing and I asked her where she had been, not in an accusatory tone, as far as I know. But she responded to me in an extremely defensive manner, asking why I was coming at her like that. It came out of nowhere, and I was really shocked because I was pretty sure that I hadn't spoken unkindly in any fashion. She seemed ready to explode at me, so I took a breath and asked her again as calmly as I could. She just stared at me, angry, for like a full 10 seconds before she eventually said that she had a date with her girls that she completely forgot about. Honestly, that answer sounded suspect to me, so I brought up the previous time that I had been depressed and the way that she had also gone out during those days, but she claimed that she had no idea what I was talking about. To be fair, it had been over 2 months at that point, so I didn't want to call her a liar in my head. Though a pattern was starting to be established, even after things started to seem fine between the two of us, it was still on my mind because I knew there was something being hidden. I just couldn't figure out what it was. It was when Daphne vanished on a third occasion. I wasn't even having a bad day, I was just really busy, that I knew something had to be up. It was so evident to me at that point. When she got back home that day, I didn't attempt to start any conversation about where she had been. I just conversed normally about mundane things, and she didn't lash out or anything like she did the other time. I was hoping she might have volunteered where she was this time around, but she didn't say anything to that effect. I think it was precisely at that point that I knew I was going to have to find out where she was going on my own. I have always been a relatively tech-savvy person, and I know my way around an Android phone pretty well. As soon as my wife went into the shower without her phone, I went straight to Google Maps to check her location history. That night, she went to a bar and then to what seemed to be a residential address. I checked the previous time that she had disappeared like that, and it was pretty similar. She went to the same bar, but she ended up in a different house. I was taking pictures of all this with my phone, especially because I planned to do more research on the addresses she was heading to. All I needed was for those addresses to truly belong to any of her girls, and I would feel so much better. I was going to check the dates for the very first time that she disappeared, but I could hear her wrapping up in the bathroom, so I stopped. But honestly, I felt like I was going to lose my mind from the uncertainty. I wasn't too sure how I was going to find the information that I needed based on those addresses alone. But I knew it would be the only way that I could get any closure. I knew there were two possibilities. Either my wife was cheating on me, or she was truly going out with her girls. Quite unceremoniously, going out to bars and ending up at someone's home could align with what she had told me, but it also could mean that she was going out to bars and going home with random men. She eventually came out of the bathroom. We did some small talk, which I really had to struggle through, and she went to bed. She went to sleep with her phone in her hand, and I carefully pried it out. My heart was beating furiously, trust me. She didn't wake up though, and after doing a little mental math, I checked for the first day that she disappeared suddenly. It was the same thing on all 3 days, though on 2 of those days she went to the same address after the bar. I think it was at that point that I realized what I needed to do. I had considered hiring a private investigator to tell me who lived at the addresses that I had, but I realized there was an easier way for me to do things. I'd just need to set her up. The next weekend, I did my best to fake being in a mood, which was a lot harder than I assumed it would be, considering all the practice that I've gotten through my years. Exactly as I wanted, around 6 p.m., Daphne went to the room, came out dressed, and slipped out of the house, thinking she was unnoticed. A few minutes later, I went too, with the cartoonish disguise of a pair of shades, a jacket, and a baseball cap, and I headed straight to the same bar that I knew she was going to. I really hoped she wouldn't be able to identify me, otherwise my plan might never work again. I walked into the bar, and it didn't take me long to spot her sitting at the bar. She was alone, but she had ordered a drink already. I remember hoping that her friends would eventually join her there. I found a corner to sit in that I hoped she wouldn't notice me in, and I waited for a long time before I saw someone sit beside her. They sat there in silence for a bit before he said something to her, and I guessed from the body language that they didn't know each other. If I had come in about 10 minutes later, though, I'd likely have reached a different conclusion with the way they were laughing and the way she kept touching him. I really felt that I had seen enough at that point, but I used my self-control to wait and see how things were going to play out. There was still a stupid part of me that was hoping that her girls would show up and the guy was just there to help kill some time. Nope. I was there until about an hour and several drinks later when they both stood up and exited the bar together. I followed them as they went on foot about 3 blocks away. Then they went up to an apartment building, and that was it. I felt like I was going to lose my mind, and as someone who already acknowledges that they have a fragile psyche, this certainly didn't help. I felt like I was going to lose my mind from across the street from the apartment building. I decided to wait, though. I was going to wait until she came out, take a picture, and head back home. That was my plan. It was my plan until I actually saw her come out with the guy. I took several pictures as they stood under the well-lit entrance to the building, but when they had a parting kiss right there, I had taken my last photo. I stormed across the street against what I knew was my better judgment, and to be honest, I know I was very uncomposed. You can't blame me, though. I can barely remember the things that I said, but I remember that I was shouting and yelling, asking her how she could do that to me, saying that I knew she was up to no good, and so on. And so on. I was almost about to slug the guy beside her with the stupid, baffled look on his face before she told him to go back to his house, and he obeyed right away. When it was just me and her, we just stood there staring at each other. I know I was shaking with rage. and I was battling with a lot of very messed up thoughts in that moment. You know what it is like to realize that you can never really trust anyone, that anyone is capable of betraying you? I think it was when all these thoughts were pouring through my head that I asked her, "Why? I'm tired of dealing with your depression and your moods. It's exhausting. I needed happiness." She didn't think much before she let that loose on me, and honestly, I was left broken by these words. Even now, a few days after this thing happened, those words still sting. It was exactly what I was trying to avoid when I wanted her to be sure she wanted something serious with me, because I've always known that I'll be forever burdened with depression, but she seemed to accept me for who I was and who I am. I just started walking away at that point. It took me over an hour to get back home because I was wandering the streets aimlessly. It was dangerous, but part of me wanted to get hurt, honestly. Maybe the pain could end, or something would happen to help me forget about everything. Looking back, that was a stupid thought, but I get where it was coming from. By the time I got back to the house, Daphne was there, and I guess she had enough time to realize how stupid her words were. She started to beg as soon as she saw me, but I said nothing. I went straight to her room and locked the door because seeing her was infuriating me. I wanted to tell her to get out of the house, but at the same time, I didn't want to spare a word on her. I barely slept, but the next morning I didn't see her. I was glad I didn't need to interact with her, and I didn't care where she was. I still don't know where she is or where she's been, and I don't care, but at this point I need to make her hurt. I've been living my life with hurt because I lived through so many traumas, and to have the person I thought was my safe space add to it was one of the most painful things that I've been through. I'll be reading every single comment that's dropped here because I have nothing better to do, but I want to know how I can make her hurt the way that she's hurt me. I think that's the only thing that will help me feel some form of closure at this point, because I have no interest in cheating back. Imagine surviving a tragic childhood drama only to stumble into a midlife betrayal. It's like life handed you a ticket to a never-ending emotional roller coaster, and instead of enjoying the view, you're left wondering when the ride will finally end. But hey, look at the bright side, OP. You've inadvertently conducted a social experiment on the limits of marital patience and the human capacity for betrayal. Just when you think you're having a bad day, your wife's side quest for happiness turns into your main storyline. It's almost poetic. How her quest for happiness involves stumbling into the arms of a stranger at a bar. But seriously, as for making her hurt the way she made you hurt, remember that nothing screams poetic justice quite like hitting the reset button on your life. Move on, find someone who understands that depression isn't just a phase, and live your best life. The best revenge, after all, is living well and maybe, just maybe, making her watch you do it from afar. Realizing what she threw away for a few cheap thrills at a bar. Update: I want to thank absolutely everyone who helped me out with my previous post. Honestly, it was really hard to open up like that and expose all my weaknesses, but most of the comments were incredibly kind and supportive. And I'm very grateful for that. It's been quite a while since I made my last post, but I'm glad to say that things are much better for me, and I took a lot of advice that you all gave to plot my next move as best I could. The first thing I did was call her over for us to talk. She had no idea, but I had already spoken at length to the divorce attorney, and I knew there was no fixing what we had. I admit that I might have been fool enough if she had merely cheated on me once, but after cheating on me with what I assumed were multiple people and also the horrible words she spoke to me, I knew there was no going back. I wouldn't ever be able to love this woman again. As soon as she got to my house, I asked her to sit down, and she did. I asked her how many people she had cheated on me with, and she initially said just the one, but I kept pressing, telling her that I knew more than she thought I did. She insisted over and over that it was just one person until I bluffed and told her I'd hired a private investigator. I mentioned one address and then another, and that's when she finally decided to let loose that she had slept with 3 people. I don't know if that was the absolute truth, but it was all I needed to hear. I handed her the divorce papers at that point, and I told her that I couldn't do life with her anymore. She started begging and pleading, which wasn't unexpected, but I think she realized that it was pointless, and she basically gave up after a bit. She walked out with the papers, and I drank the rest of the day. Eventually, we got to the whole divorce proceeding stage, and I was glad that I had a bit of evidence pointing to the fact that she was unfaithful, which helped swing things in my favor. Unsurprisingly, my mental health got dragged into the whole matter, with a lot of talk about how it made it hard to live with me. Honestly, things got really dirty at that point, and it was horrible hearing my struggles weaponized like that. Of course, I think most divorces are messy like that, as far as movies have shown me. I don't want to bore you with how this side of things went, but it dragged on for a pretty long time. In the end, her lawyer was able to make it seem like her dealing with me and my mental health had been a major struggle for her, which I can admit, it definitely isn't easy, but it wasn't permitted as justification for infidelity. For the most part, things pushed in my favor. I managed to escape any alimony payments, and I relinquished our apartment because there were going to be too many bad memories for me there. I managed to get the car though, which was certainly going to be more useful for me than the house would be. After the divorce, weeks later, once I had settled into my new place, I made sure to tell every single person who knew both of us that Daphne and I were splitting up. I went into detail, not telling a single lie, but exposing her for cheating on me because of my depressive episodes. I sent the same text to friends, family, co-workers I was familiar with, and even our former landlady. I needed to make sure that everyone knew that she was a scumbag so that if they wanted to get involved with her in the future, they'd know what they were up against. She called me about an hour after and cursed me out for like 10 minutes straight, but I just let her get it all out before hanging up the phone on her. I haven't spoken to Daphne since she called me to yell every expletive in the book, but a coworker replied to a message of mine saying that she's been having a hard time with gossip in the workplace. That maybe I'd consider recanting my statement to help her out. I left her on read. I don't think I'm going to do relationships anymore. There's too much fear in me now as to the ways a woman can hurt me, and I'm not excited to discover a new one. Maybe I'll have fun on dating apps because the body has needs, but I don't think I'm after anything serious anymore. I'm relatively old, I don't desire children, and maybe not having a woman in my life will bring simplicity, which is fine by me. Anyway, I hope those of you who choose to will find women you can trust and love forever, because I know that they're out there. But I'm just not willing to take the risk and find any of them myself. First off, kudos to you for taking charge of your situation and navigating the emotional minefield that was your last post. It's no small feat to bare your soul like that, and it's great to hear that you found the support you needed. So, the showdown with Daphne, what a scene! You handled it like a seasoned pro. The bluff about the private investigator? Genius. And lo and behold, she confessed to 3 affairs. Honestly, wow. There she was, pleading and begging while you stood firm. It's sad to see how things turned out, but it's clear there was no salvaging the relationship. You knew your worth and didn't settle for less, which is commendable. The divorce proceeding sounded brutal, with your mental health dragged into the spotlight like that. It's disheartening how your struggles were weaponized against you, but it's a relief to hear that things mostly went in your favor. Keeping the car and ditching the apartment and all its bad memories sounds like a smart move. Your post-divorce move was both bold and brilliant, telling everyone the truth about Daphne. That's a masterclass in public service announcements. Sure, she wasn't happy, and that epic 10-minute curse-out was probably expected, but you stood your ground and made sure the people around you know the real story. What would you have done? Thank you for joining us today.
2 police officers, wearing blue uniforms, arrived at my garage in a patrol car. I secretly observed them from my spot beneath the lift. It was strange to see police officers so happy, but their expressions turned serious as they got closer. They confirmed my identity and shared unfortunate news about my wife. Something happened at our house, and she was in the hospital, but they couldn't provide details. Trying to leave immediately, they intercepted me, seeking explanations. They inquired about my whereabouts for the last 3 hours. I assured them that I had been there all day and suggested asking my 2 mechanics for confirmation. Apologetically, I mentioned that I had sneaked out for 10 minutes around 11 o'clock a.m. to get coffee for all of us. While one of the policemen chatted with Mike and Pete, another took note of the coffee shop I had visited. He then asked if I could show him my car. Without hesitation, I agreed, stating that my truck was outside. I led him to my truck, and he thoroughly inspected it before granting me permission to go to the hospital. I had a concerned look as a hospital staff member explained Kate's injuries, the blood transfusion, and the ongoing surgery. I thought it was unprofessional for the doctor to half smile during our conversation. Leaving the hospital, the same 2 policemen intercepted me for more answers. We went to the hospital cafeteria for much-needed coffee. They inquired about my relationship with my wife. I explained that we met and got married relatively late 8 years ago. Kate successfully worked as an attorney, wanting children but waiting until almost 40 to establish herself in her job. They asked why she was home on a weekday. I explained Kate quit her job a month ago to rest before pregnancy, a kind of vacation before at least 10 years of domestic service. I concluded by expressing my love for my wife, stating that we are doing well and looking forward to having a baby. They asked about John Barton. I denied knowing him, and they walked away without answering. Trusting my team to lock the garage, I went straight home. 2 forensic scientists and a detective were searching the house. The detective introduced himself, explained what he knew, and posed the same questions as the previous officers, along with a new one. He inquired about the presence of a few drops of blood in the downstairs toilet. I responded, expressing my lack of knowledge. I then questioned the detective about the focus on me as a suspect and sought assurance that they were actively investigating other possibilities. He reassured me, stating that they had several leads and mentioned his colleague talking to Mrs. Barton. "Curious about John Barton?" I asked. Apologetically, the detective stated that it was inappropriate for him to comment. They walked away, leaving me in a state of confusion. I went upstairs to the master bedroom and observed the unfolding scene, realizing I would be truly shocked if I were watching it for the first time. Earlier in the day, around 10 a.m. at work, I started thinking about closeness. There's nothing unusual about this. They say guys think about closeness an average of 67 times per waking hour, and men virtually cut off from their wives for a month can double that. Since Kate left work, our 2 to 3 times a week has dropped to almost 0. Kate was either in a bad mood, bored and depressed, or too tired. Personally, I thought it was because her normal life was ending, and she was scared. Being a caring husband, I didn't want to pressure her. She'll come out of her fear at her own pace. I knew my life would change after having children, but I understood hers would be turned upside down. I kept daydreaming about our early years of marriage, where our bed life was anywhere, anytime. In any case, we made an effort to keep it fresh and new as long as our imaginations existed, and then slowly fell into the automatic mode that long-term partners often do. I snapped out of my daze, realizing I needed to act. Restore spontaneity. Head home now and be close with Kate until you're completely spent. Decision made. It's time to leave and go home. I informed Mick and Pete that I'd be away for a while. Pete asked if I could test drive the car he just serviced. Returning home, disappointment struck as I saw an unfamiliar car in the driveway. My friend's visit ruined my plans. Nevertheless, I decided to go in. Maybe my friend could be convinced to leave and salvage my plans. Without suspicion, I opened the front door and my hair stood on end. I knew my marriage was over. The unmistakable sounds of joyous affinity reverberated down the stairs. It was almost automatic for me to record a video whenever a client brought their car to the garage, a precaution against accusations of damage. Heart pounding, I ran up the steps, camera ready, and peeked through the bedroom door. Yes, it was Kate. And yes, it was some guy I didn't recognize, happily on our bed. Suppressing the urge to react violently, I turned away. I can honestly say this was the most challenging thing I've ever done. My legs gave way, and I collapsed outside the door, completely devastated. Dimly aware that they were reaching their peaks nearby, I couldn't tell how long I stayed there. Gradually, it dawned on me that all sounds of their betrayal had stopped, replaced only by conversations. It was just as bad, and still tore me to the core. Realizing I needed to think, I knew I had to get out of earshot. Reacting emotionally would at least land him in the hospital and me in prison. Quietly getting up, tiptoeing downstairs, I slumped on the sofa, away from the sights, smells, and most sounds of betrayal. Free from emotional distractions, I did what I knew best and devised a plan. Get him out of sight, confront him, throw him out the back door undressed, and repeat the process with her. Without bruises and witnesses, I hoped to avoid a trial. Fortunately, I had the perfect shock weapon in my workshop. 2 years ago, in the Army Reserve National Guard, my skills earned me the task of clearing trucks, where I found a small device that would now come in handy. Police call them stun grenades. Slightly larger than a regular grenade, they're a small canister with a lever pin ignition mechanism, specifically made for hostage rescue. While designed to cause minimal physical damage, the explosion is accompanied by a flash with a power of 8 million candles and a shock sound of 170 decibels. The flash alone can stun a person for at least 5 seconds. Fueled by my newfound hatred, my mind quickly formed the rest of the plan. To avoid damaging my house, I couldn't just throw a grenade on the floor. I took out the device, quickly glued a short piece of rope to it, and put a loop on the end of the rope. Prepared in this way, I tiptoed upstairs, realizing secrecy was no longer necessary. Clearly hearing men's moans from behind the bedroom door, I paused only to pick up my phone from the floor outside the door where I had dropped it and glanced around the door frame. It was evident that the second round of affinity was in full swing. My wife was satisfying her lover, caressing him below the waist. Mentally rehearsing the sequence of events I had decided on, I took a deep breath and took action. Stepping into the room, I looped the end of the rope around the hook on the bottom of the light fixture, leaving the device hanging halfway to the floor. I pulled out the pin, put it in my pocket, and walked out the door, pressing my fingers tightly to my ears and closing my eyes. Even with my precautions, the effect was amazing. I clearly felt the shockwave and the bright reflected light through my eyelids. Following the plan, I jumped into the room again, ready for action. This time, it was my turn to be surprised. I don't know exactly what I expected to see, but it was nothing like the scene that appeared before me. Mr. Anonymous lay on his back in bed, and there was clear damage below his waist. Either nature had been cruel, or something crucial was missing. Kate lay on the floor, her eyes empty, mouth moving like a fish out of water. Confused, I retreated to the hall to ponder. My thoughts were abruptly halted by 2 horrifying screams from the bedroom, followed by loud bangs and slamming doors. It dawned on me that I was in serious trouble. My plan had failed once again. Peeking into the chaotic scene, the guy tumbled out of bed, clutching his groin and howling. Kate was absent, presumably in the bathroom. We needed to erase any evidence. Returning to the room, I quickly located the detonator for the device and added it to the rope. Finding nothing else, I concluded everything else had been destroyed. I approached the bathroom cautiously. Kate was on her knees, vomiting into the toilet. I had no desire to assist her. I just didn't care anymore. En route to the door, I spotted something on the floor and picked up a warm, soft piece resembling a tongue tip. In the first floor toilet, I disposed of it. They wouldn't be able to reattach it. Trying not to make a sound, I sped down the street, thankful once again for our distance from neighboring houses. Halfway to the garage, I emptied my pockets into a roadside trash can. 10 minutes later, I was back in my small work garage. I called Pete and Mike, my dirty, oil-stained employees and friends. They rushed to me, sensing my alarm. I asked them to vouch for me for the last 45 minutes, and they agreed almost simultaneously, saying, "Of course, boss." Before they could agree too quickly, I cautioned them that what I did was very serious, and once I explained, they might not be so hasty to answer. I expressed uncertainty about the charges I might face, acknowledging that it could lead to jail time. Before providing an explanation, I put on my old overalls and rubbed an oily rag on my face and hands, preparing for the impending police arrival, which I expected. The guys looked at me, somewhat stunned, as I briefly recounted recent events. Mike was the first to break, attempting to hold on for 15 seconds before bursting into laughter. This set off Pete, and soon we were all hooting uncontrollably. It took a full 5 minutes before we regained composure, and with handshakes and promises of support, they returned to their oily workspaces. Over the next hour, Spontaneous laughter echoed from various dingy rooms. My wife Kate was about to face the consequences she deserved for avoiding my humble friends. That evening, I cleaned up the master bedroom, washing the bathroom floor. I decided to discard the bedding and mentally noted to buy a new rug. Torn curtains also needed removal. Trying to stay busy to avoid thoughts, the constant phone calls and knocking on the door didn't help. Yes, the media was in a frenzy. The mix of infidelity and a man losing his manhood was a story made for them. I only opened the door once and quickly turned off the phone. Finally, with no distractions, I began to reflect. Did I regret what I did? Strangely, no. I despised cheaters and had seen many become unrecognizable when catching their partners. Oddly, even before lunch, I was confident my wife shared this passion. I was shocked to be so wrong. Moreover, Kate's motivation astonished me. She appeared as devoted to me as I was to her, and our bed life had been fantastic. Well, until recently. After hours of inner turmoil, I could only find one clue. I can still recall the uneasy feeling I had 2 months ago when Kate said she was retiring to enjoy her last days of freedom. I thought she'd work until at least the 7th month of pregnancy. Something about her wanting one last celebration before having kids seemed strange. My personal cell phone interrupted my thoughts. Not many people knew this number. Caller ID showed Kate's parents' number. They lived about 3 hours away in the same state. I answered since I always got along well with them. After fewer pleasantries than usual, her mother got to the point. She asked me if I knew why journalists were besieging their house, mentioning that they would have to find out someday. She couldn't bring herself to go into detail. She then inquired if I had watched the local news that evening, maybe the main news, mentioning a story about a cheater who bit off her lover's dignity. I always liked her mom's colorful language and her views on life, but it didn't make our conversation easy. Yes, Mom, look, there's no easy way to say this, so I'll get straight to it. The woman's name is Kate. Luckily, my confusion was interrupted by a scream, followed by a beep. When I pressed the end call button on my phone, I noticed a warning on the screen. This reminded me that I wrote down the end of my marriage just 8 hours ago. I had vague memories of leaving my phone recording outside my bedroom door. I knew that if I never knew or believed the reason why Kate did what she did, I would never be able to trust any woman again. There was a good chance that I would die a lonely misogynist, doomed to a life of uselessness. With desperate hope, I started playing the video. I already knew what it was showing. The pain was too fresh to relive the scene. I opened my eyes just as I put the phone on the floor. Without a visual representation, just a view of the hall ceiling, I had to imagine Mr. and Mrs. Infidelity lying side by side on the bed. I couldn't hear the sound clearly, so I downloaded the file to my computer and ran it through an amplifier. This is an important part of their conversation. Kate, it was fantastic. The past week has been great, actually. Does this really have to end today? My offer still stands. Just give me your word, and I will divorce Sarah and marry you. Well, yes, it looks like it will work. A great start to a marriage with a guy who left his wife and kids. No, and I love Dave too much to hurt him like that. In addition, he is a great husband and will be a good father. After today, I will be Mrs. Goody-Goody, a housewife at least until the youngest of our children start school. You can't love him that much. It's not him lying here next to you. No, you're mistaken. I love him very much. The moment I met him, I knew he was my only soulmate. I will never meet another. I am happy that I have such a good man who spoils me and will nurse me when I get a big belly from his 2 or 3 babies. No, I want nothing more than to die in his arms, surrounded by our grandchildren. Well, that was a great speech. But it begs the obvious question. Why are you with me now? At least Kate had the humanity to think about it. There was silence for a good half a minute. I guess she just missed the past. She didn't get married until she was 31, and was a bit of a wild girl. She missed just walking into a bar and getting attention from all kinds of guys. The thrill of leading a guy forward and then impulsively deciding whether he gets what he wants or not. Lately, Dave has been deer hunting with his buddies every other weekend. 3 weekends ago, she decided to take a trip down memory lane and check out a bar. This resulted in one night that was okay, but unsatisfying. Then last Saturday, she happened to walk into the bar I was at. And here we are. God, she's so cold. Kate, just consider this the last hooray. Anyway, what is she complaining about? Come here. I turned off the sound. At least now I knew that I was a good lover and husband. The problem wasn't me. The following days passed in complete disappointment. 2 days later, the reporters demobilized and left my quiet street. The hospital administrator called me and said that Kate would like some pajamas. I missed this one. She will have to put up with these humiliating hospital gowns. 2 days later, her father called me. He apologized for his daughter's behavior and expressed hope that I would keep in touch with him to try to sweeten the deal. He reminded me that he has another daughter and she was recently divorced. Sorry, Dad. It's just too weird. 4 days after this event, he was shown on the news again. Mr. Not-So-Big-Deal has been released from the hospital. Journalists dug up something and exposed him as a serial cheater. So it was with some pleasure that they announced that, although the surgeons had succeeded in sewing his manhood back together, it was very unlikely that it would achieve any of its intended functions. At the end of that week, I received an unexpected visitor. Mrs. Barton, or Sarah, as she insisted I call her, was a pretty lady with sad eyes. She told me that she had heard rumors that I might have some evidence that could help her in her divorce case. I explained that maybe it was true, but I couldn't admit it without exposing myself. She understood everything and was very apologetic for asking. I told her that I thought there was such an abundance of circumstantial evidence that she wouldn't need what I had. If this turns out to be wrong, I will persuade her to return and perhaps change her mind. There was such sadness in her that I felt sorry for her. Pulling out the video file, I played her only in the aftermath of the big explosion. The shock of her husband's screams made her cower at first, but she soon pulled herself together. Suffice it to say that she was not very sad when she left. Being the helpful guy that I am, I invited her to come pick me up when the sadness returned. Oh yeah, that wasn't the last time I saw Sarah Barton. The last visitor I received was probably the strangest. On Saturday, I answered the door to the detective I had spoken to at the house. On the day of the big event, the suit disappeared, leaving only jeans and a shirt. Hey, son. No, I won't come in. I just wanted to say that if there was insufficient evidence, I recommended that the case be closed. Hearing my gratitude, he turned to leave but stopped and looked back. Listen, at the end of the year, I will retire. If I come back after this, will you tell me how you did it? I just smiled and wished him a good day. Kate's letter arrived the following Tuesday. My dear Dave, I can't express how ashamed and sorry I am that I did this to you. I understand perfectly why you couldn't bring yourself to visit me, and I forgive you, unconditionally. I never thought about the full extent of the possible consequences of my actions. I, of course, did not imagine that my parents would actually disown me. I know that I have lost your love, trust, and respect forever, which hurts me more than I can describe. I will understand if you never want to talk to me again, but it may help your recovery if you allow me to explain why I did what I did. Just be sure that it's all my fault. Doctors say that I won't be able to speak normally for a long time, if at all. They think I swallowed the tip of my tongue when I bit it off. They tell me about some experimental stretching technique that can restore some function. I hope this works, and I can at least get back to my career as a distraction from the dull, loveless, childless future I'm currently facing. Ask anything you want in a divorce, and I will sign it. If you could find it in your heart to keep me on your health insurance for the near future, I would be forever grateful. Farewell, my love. I wish you nothing but happiness in the future. I hope I haven't completely ruined your life. Your Kate, aka your cheating wife. The letter touched me so much that I immediately reversed my previous decision and sent her pajamas to the hospital. Now where are Mick and Pete's phone numbers? Do I owe them a beer? A keg?
Jerry Jacobson took pride in his practical nature and commitment to his work. His job often meant long stretches on the road, overseeing fencing contracts and designing farm structures, which frequently kept him away from home for days. These trips gave him time to think, and he appreciated the change of scenery. Yet they also stirred a lingering unease. He sensed an unsettling doubt about what he might come back to. Though he never voiced his concerns, something felt subtly wrong in his marriage to Shelley, as if an undercurrent of tension was quietly simmering. Over time, Jerry noticed Shelley's behavior changing. Once attentive, she was now distant, her actions increasingly evasive. The tension between them grew after years of unsuccessful attempts to start a family. While Jerry tried to dismiss it as ordinary stress, Shelley's insistence on installing a complicated alarm system struck him as odd, even obsessive. At first, he brushed it off, but a nagging suspicion started to take root in his mind. Sneaking into his own house undetected wasn't hard for Jerry. He just had to circle around back, enter through the basement, and avoid triggering the system Shelley had pressed him to install. Entering from the front wasn't an option. The alarm would go off instantly. Shelley had been adamant about extra security, so much so that Jerry finally gave in and set up the system. The alarm even covered the garage door, a detail Shelley had specifically requested. She insisted on a 10-second delay on the keypad. 45 seconds is ridiculous. A thief could make it to my bedroom before the alarm kicks in, she had argued. You just want to give your boyfriend time to jump out the window, Jerry joked. Shelley just laughed and continued making dinner, but her logic was convincing enough that he reset the delay. Of course, this meant he'd trigger the alarm each time he returned home, but it would only last a few seconds until he entered the 4-digit code. You check it every day to make sure it works, Shelley teased him one afternoon as he walked in, annoyed after disabling it about 24 times. He knew all the windows were secure too, but he also knew no one would notice the wire he ran along the top of the door frame, bypassing the sensor. Shelley rarely ventured to the basement, and even if she did, Jerry doubted she'd see it. When he tested the setup, the panel lit up perfectly and the cables held steady. The door made no noise. The hinges, which he'd oiled, moved smoothly. He'd reinforced each step of the stairs himself nearly a week earlier. Shelley was actually pleased about the stairs. She had been asking him for months to fix their creaky state. He'd tested their strength with his full weight and smiled to himself. No sound at all. His small .22 caliber high-standard pistol, stashed in his windbreaker on hooks at the top of the stairs, held 9 rounds. It felt oddly reassuring to reach into his pocket and feel it right where he left it. Jerry had no intention of using it unless absolutely necessary. But he wasn't going to back down either. Something was off, and he was determined to get to the bottom of it. There was no sense in confronting Shelley. If something was happening, she'd deny it, and if not, he'd look foolish. He was troubled by the 3 years they'd spent trying to conceive without success. He had even seen a doctor who'd humorously assured him he was more than fertile. The doctor had chuckled, slapped Jerry on the shoulder, and urged him to just go home. It was Shelley's turn, yet she'd chosen her own doctor, the one she'd been seeing since before their marriage. She insisted on it. One day, by coincidence, Jerry spotted her leaving the hair salon. She was supposed to be at her doctor's appointment, but instead she was getting her hair and nails done. Jerry didn't think much of it at the time, already late for work, until the thought lingered as he parked in his garage. This was just last month. That evening, she'd told him, looking sorrowful, that while she could potentially have children, it was unlikely. She'd even shed quiet tears. He held her as she calmed down, but a sick feeling settled in his stomach. "We can just keep trying, honey," she murmured, but her tone didn't feel quite right. Not entirely honest. That's when Jerry began paying closer attention. He doubted the hairdresser, a woman who he saw as far removed from medical expertise, was offering Shelley the guidance she needed on such matters. Treason? No way. It couldn't be. Shelley was always at home. Always. No hints, not a single one. Whenever he came back, she was there. Sure, he had to go on overnight trips a few times a month, but that was normal. Could it be pills? He wondered. Was she hiding independence? but that too seemed impossible. She looked healthy, even carrying an extra pound or two on her rounded figure. Maybe gambling. She could be playing at Indian casinos, but a quick check of her finances showed nothing unusual. Shelley was generally frugal, aside from clothes, the occasional $50 salon visit, and keeping her nails done. But her nails always looked well kept. This was the part he never quite understood. He'd heard her complain, "Damn, I broke my nail," at least 50 times. Later that night, while Shelley was in the shower, Jerry searched her drawers and looked in her closet. Shelley loved beautiful clothes. She had outfits he'd never seen. One dresser drawer held a little bag of underwear that he couldn't recall her wearing before, but that wasn't unusual. When they went out to dinner or dancing, she would often surprise him with stunning outfits and skimpy underwear. Jerry enjoyed how Shelley would model her looks, delighting in his reactions. She could certainly turn heads, and she knew it. He almost wished it wasn't Saturday night. Dancing with her made him feel proud, and afterward he'd have the pleasure of discovering what she was wearing underneath. Then he found birth control pills. His heart pounded, and he barely composed himself before she finished showering. His first impulse was to confront her, but he reminded himself to look into things more closely. Years earlier, he'd made a mistake with Dana, his then-girlfriend. He had planned to propose, and it seemed she'd been thinking about it too. They'd even met each other's families. But one night at a party, he saw her passionately kiss another man, pressing close to him. Shocked, he watched as she greeted him. Jerry had stormed over and knocked the guy flat. Only then did he learn it was her brother back from college for the weekend. Dana had wanted to surprise him with her brother's visit, which had gone terribly wrong. She didn't answer his calls after that night. Jerry had barely reached second base with Dana, but she'd hinted that things were about to change. That very evening, she'd even slipped a packet of protection into his shirt pocket with a mischievous smile. But his attack on her brother in front of everyone ruined it all. Thinking before acting was a lesson he'd learned well. Jerry's work involved ordering and designing farm fences, sheds, and paddocks. He created pens to help farmers manage their livestock for auctions or medical care. It was a rewarding job, allowing him to meet good people and work outdoors. His last assignment had been particularly rewarding. Not only did he sell nearly 4 miles of fencing, but the family invited him to dinner. Ham and cornbread with black beans, homemade, not from a box. Sam Martin, a rugged old man, was tall and lean, often seen in faded red long johns under his unbuttoned work shirt, held by suspenders. His wife, Dottie, was cheerful and plump, always smiling. By day's end, after riding across the ranch on Honda ATVs, Sam and Jerry had become close. Both shared a love of hunting and fishing, and Sam felt almost like the father figure Jerry had never had. It was remarkable how two men could bond so quickly over a day's conversation, but that's what happened. Sam and Dottie had a daughter, Molly, around 19, and quite attractive. Even in a flannel shirt and jeans, she was undeniably a beautiful young woman. She seemed interested in Jerry, though he was married, so it wouldn't go anywhere. Yet her image lingered in his mind the next day on the drive home. Good people, Jerry thought, the kind you'd want to know better. Their ranch was blessed with hills and good water, and Sam had been raising his herds there for years. But with new neighbors moving in, unhappy with cattle roaming on their lawns, fences had become a necessity. Sam faced a choice: fence his land or let development overrun it. He chose to build. This had been one of Jerry's biggest sales. The downside of Jerry's job was the distance. Many large farms were hundreds of miles from home. For this last trip, he'd gone over 350 miles into Idaho. His company paid for his motels and meals, so rather than driving back the same day, Jerry usually stayed overnight and returned home the following day. This time felt different. Sam and Dottie insisted he stay the night, showing him to the spacious bedroom upstairs. It was so quiet there that Jerry had trouble falling asleep. Now and then, he heard sheep or cows, each sound jolting him awake. Around 2 a.m., he tossed the blanket aside as the warm night settled in. He got up to use the bathroom and, on his way down the hall, passed another bedroom with a partially open door. A soft nightlight glowed inside. Molly lay atop the blanket, undressed. Her lower body was in shadow, but one bare bosom was highlighted in the faint light. She looked to be asleep, and the scene was intensely sensual. Jerry acknowledged her beauty, but quickly looked away. It wasn't right to linger. Returning to his room, he noticed her door was now closed. A flush rose to his face. She must have caught him peeking. The next morning, Sam and Dottie invited him to the kitchen, where heaps of eggs, ham, and potatoes awaited, better than anything he'd ever tasted. "We grow it all ourselves," 16 acres on the North Ridge just for potatoes, Sam said, noticing Jerry's smile as he took a second helping. Molly strolled in then, looking around sleepily and yawning. She wore jeans and a flannel shirt, looking incredible. She gave Jerry a sly glance, raising one eyebrow in a playful way that made him blush. Dottie noticed, glancing between them with a grin. "More coffee, Jerry?" she asked. Jerry nodded, feeling a little out of place, but grateful for the warm hospitality. After breakfast, he packed his things, placing the signed contract and a generous check into his briefcase. It was time to head back to his own life. He thought he could live happily like Sam and Dottie. As he climbed into his truck, Dottie handed him a loaf of homemade cornbread, which he looked forward to eating on the long drive. Molly stood on the porch, holding the railing with one hand. Jerry waved as he started the truck and she waved back. On the drive home, he couldn't stop thinking about her, trying to push the thought away, but the image of her lying there undressed kept flashing in his mind. Shelley kept their home spotless and was always there to greet him with hugs when he returned. His trips rarely lasted more than a night, and he loved coming home. But oddly, after these trips, Shelley always seemed extra affectionate. At 28, she was in great shape, her blonde hair and a short updo. She was well-built, especially up top, and worked in real estate commission sales. Her work wasn't bad either. Occasionally, she made more than he did, though that was rare, and in recent years, she sometimes went a month or two without sales. Despite this, Jerry knew he could use a new truck. His old Dodge Ram still looked good, but was showing signs of wear. He held off on replacing it, as it was fully paid off. Their bed life was good. He came home a couple of times a week, and Shelley was always thrilled. He felt their life together was solid. Sure, there were some things he'd like to improve, but he made the best of it. His last trip ended like the others, Shelley waiting, ready for love time. Minutes later, they were in bed, the sheets crisp and clean as they always were when he came home. Despite the lingering suspicion in the back of his mind, Jerry managed well. When focused on work, his mind was on numbers and plans, not these suspicions. He had nothing concrete to go on. Maybe Shelley had gone to both the doctor and the salon that day. New clothes, fancy underwear, she could have been planning a surprise for him, as she sometimes did, coming out dressed to impress for a nice dinner, doing a little twirl to show off a new dress or a tiny strip with a grin. But the suspicion wouldn't leave him. He had to find the truth. Birth control pills meant she'd lied to him, and it bothered him that she might not just be avoiding having kids. He made changes to figure things out, adjustments she didn't even notice. The night things unraveled, Jerry drove past his house, scanning for an unfamiliar car. There was none, which he expected, given the nearby neighbors. Upstairs, the light was on, the curtains tightly drawn. He felt a dull ache, holding the pack of birth control pills he'd found in her underwear drawer. Seeing her at the salon instead of the doctor's had been a shock, and that's where all this started. "If you smell a rat, it's close by," his mom had said 100 times. Jerry sensed it at the top of the stairs. He listened, only hearing the shower running. A strange sound at nearly 2 a.m. He'd expected her to be asleep or maybe catch her doing something else. Since he'd told her he was in Idaho, she thought he couldn't be home until late the next day. There was even a good gig in Idaho. He'd arranged a sale over the phone. Sam and Dottie, pleased with his first job, had asked him back for more. Though he was invited, he still had to compete in a small auction for another project nearby. He briefly thought he might enjoy it. Maybe he'd get some more cornbread. And maybe he'd even see Molly again. Jerry shook his head, trying to clear his mind. He wasn't himself, letting strange thoughts slip in. Here he was, standing at the top of his own stairs, tool in hand, thinking about work and a woman he barely knew. Part of him wanted to turn around and slip back out of the house, but he needed to know. If Shelley wasn't doing anything wrong, he could leave unnoticed and forget this ever happened. But what if she was? Jerry didn't know what he'd do if there was someone with her. The thought of an affair twisted in his mind, nagging at him with a sad certainty. He felt foolish as he stood there, listening. All he heard was the shower running. Shelley often took long showers, so that wasn't unusual. Finally, he pushed the door open slightly, not expecting much. A man sat on the edge of the disheveled bed with his back to the door, fully dressed, reading Popular Science, Jerry's magazine. Jerry's vision reddened. The shower was still on. The man turned a page. "Who the hell are you?" Jerry demanded, stepping into the room. The man jolted and looked at Jerry in shock. It was Art Barnes, the local bank manager Shelley worked with on her real estate deals. Art was around 50, gray at the temples, and a big guy, bigger than Jerry. Jerry knew Barnes had his hands in every major deal in town, and suspected he'd put up a tough fight if things turned physical. "Wait, it's not what it looks like," Barnes stammered, then saw the tool in Jerry's hand, his eyes going wide. "You came to my house to be with my wife in my own damn bed?" Jerry growled. "Buddy, it's not—" Barnes didn't get to finish. Jerry lifted the tool, and Barnes threw the magazine aside, lunging at him. The sudden aggression took Jerry by surprise. He'd expected Barnes to back off. Barnes might have reached him before he could fire, but he had to come around the bed. Jerry shot him twice. Barnes fell, groaning. "What's going on?" Shelley's scream cut through the room as she burst from the bathroom, dripping wet and completely undressed. "Who is this? What's he doing here?" Jerry shouted. Her hand flew to her mouth as she looked down at Barnes writhing on the floor. "Jerry, it's not what it seems," she said, looking panicked. "Oh my God! You were getting ready for him!" Jerry shouted, his anger exploding. "No, honey, we were just going to talk, that's all," she whimpered. "At 2 a.m.? In our bed? Undressed? I just wanted a shower. Nothing happened." Her eyes filled with dread. "You lying witch!" he screamed, his fury boiling over. Jerry shot her too. Shelley reacted like a scene out of a movie, screaming as she fell. Jerry watched her for a moment. It all felt surreal, as if he were watching someone else's life unfold on a screen. He turned to Barnes, who lay on the floor, moaning and staring up at him in terror. "Please, don't liquidate me," Barnes begged. For a split second, Jerry considered putting a bullet in his head, but decided against it. "Fool," he muttered, delivering a hard punch to Barnes's face. Barnes went silent. Suddenly, a cold calm settled over Jerry, as if he were outside himself, watching the scene unfold. He approached Shelley, who was crying and writhing. "Was it worth it?" he asked. Shelley just stared at him, her eyes wide with fear. "Forget it," he muttered, then went to the nightstand and picked up the phone. "I found an intruder in my wife's bedroom and shot him. My wife was hurt in the struggle." "Send an ambulance," he said, his tone steady. Then he tucked the tool into his waistband and headed downstairs. In the fridge, he found his usual 6-pack of beer. On the counter sat an unopened bag of chips and a jar of mixed nuts, snacks Shelley knew he liked. Jerry grabbed them and went to the living room, sitting in a spot where he could see the base of the stairs. He thought about the job he'd just won, running the numbers in his head. The tool dug into his side, so he shifted it to a more comfortable spot. Shelley's sobbing drifted down from upstairs, and he reached over to turn on the TV. People were talking, but he couldn't follow what they were saying. The chips were fresh and tasty. By his second beer and halfway through the bag of chips, he finally heard the sirens. They sure aren't in a rush, he thought. On the way to the station, he was annoyed he hadn't been allowed to take his jar of nuts with him. They weren't exactly gentle with him either. They'd seen him sitting with the tool in his belt, so someone immediately pointed a weapon at him, yelling. One officer took the tool while Jerry was munching on a chip, only to be thrown down, arms twisted behind his back. "Ouch, that hurts," he muttered, but nobody replied. "Shut up," one of them growled. When he later asked for his jar of nuts, Jerry clammed up. "It doesn't look good," his new lawyer, Jack Ireland, told him. Jerry didn't know him. He'd never needed a lawyer before. Another inmate had recommended him. Mercer, McLaren, Hansen, Ireland, Phillips, the guy had listed. Jerry figured he'd spent enough time talking to lawyers. "I used Jack Ireland. He's solid," the guy boasted. "Then why are you still here?" Jerry asked, earning only a side eye. But he had to find someone, so he called Ireland. Jack Ireland was a short, stocky man with a battered briefcase. He reviewed the charges and shook his head. "So, what's next?" Jerry asked, glancing nervously at Ireland. Ireland leaned back, folding his arms. "Bail hearing. We'll get it. You've got enough home equity to cover it. After that, we wait for the grand jury to review the case." Jerry hesitated. "How serious is it?" "Attempted homicide," Ireland replied bluntly. He gave Jerry a hard look. "If you're going to shoot, make it count. As long as he's alive, he can testify against you. You're in deep now. And seriously, a .22? Should have gone with a Magnum," he added, a smirk creeping across his face. Jerry's voice wavered. "How bad off are they?" "No one's really told me much," Ireland sighed. "Your wife will be okay. Just a side wound. But Barnes, he's in rough shape. Those .22 rounds tend to fragment. He was in surgery for a while. Why'd you shoot him twice, anyway?" "He was still coming at me." "That second shot looks targeted. You strike below the belt," Ireland said with a side eye. "Great," Jerry muttered, making the lawyer snicker. A magnum would have blown him off, but you just punched a hole between them, he said with another snort. Almost a month later, Jerry was finally out on bail, back in fresh air that felt strangely clean after so long in jail. He'd gotten used to the prison smell. He couldn't go home. The court order kept him 100 meters away from Shelley. She'd been discharged from the hospital long before he'd been freed, but he'd beaten her to signing the paperwork. Their home was titled in both their names, so either could sign off. A small legal detail, but it worked in his favor. He guessed Shelley missed it since she'd been in the hospital. Jack Ireland knew what he was doing and ensured he'd get paid. If Shelley wanted the house, she'd have to take on some of the bills. Jack Ireland had already secured a sizable deposit on his own apartment. Jerry was broke, having used his savings to hire Ireland, and he knew that was just the beginning. He figured this would infuriate Shelley, but he didn't care. His truck was parked down the street around the corner. He figured it was at least 100 meters away, as the order required, though he wasn't sure. A dozen parking tickets were stuck to the windshield, but it hadn't been towed. Jerry grabbed the tickets and tossed them. "What are they gonna do? Arrest me?" he muttered. At work, he checked in with his boss, who seemed on edge, and informed him they no longer needed him since he'd been unavailable, forcing them to hire a replacement. Jerry understood. He'd already seen the newspaper articles. That night, he slept in his truck, parked in a place called South Park. A bit of irony, he thought. The next day, he called Ireland, who arranged for a cop to escort him to pick up some of his things. Maybe Ireland wasn't so bad. Shelley was nowhere around. Jerry packed his clothes, tools, and his 2 Epiphone guitars. He grabbed his fishing gear and all 4 of his coin collections. He considered taking the big screen TV, but realized he had nowhere to plug it in. On his way out, he saw his jar of mixed nuts still on the shelf by the chair. He grinned, grabbing it. Peeking in the fridge, he considered taking the last 5 beers. But the cop gave him a look, so he left them behind. Stepping onto the porch, he discreetly changed the alarm system's access code right in front of the cop, who didn't notice. He chuckled at the small act of defiance. At a local store, he sold 2 guitars and most of his fishing rods, keeping just 1. After that, he had $100 left to his name. He stopped by the post office where he and Shelley rented a mailbox. Unsurprisingly, his key no longer worked. Shelley had changed it. Still, his mail was there. The clerk wasn't supposed to hand it over, there was a sign saying so. But Jerry looked her square in the eye, and she handed it over quickly, clearly uneasy. Inside were credit card offers and one for a funeral plan. Fitting, he thought. He rented a new box and filled out paperwork for the court to have his address. Part of him considered leaving town, but driving a huge yellow Dodge Ram, he knew he wouldn't be hard to find. 2 weeks later, Jerry was still jobless. His unsmiling face had been all over the news, painting him as an irrationally jealous husband who'd stormed into a business meeting and started shooting. He had an idea where this version came from. Art Barnes was a respected local businessman. He realized his lawyer was right. If he'd go through the trouble of shooting, he might as well have eliminated Barnes, or else this mess would haunt him. Back at South Park, his new home, he parked his truck in the bushes to hide it from the street. He took out his fishing rod, caught some grasshoppers, and snagged 6 small trout from a nearby stream. They were undersized, but he didn't care. "What are they going to do, find me?" he muttered, grilling them over a small fire. Jerry was washing his pan in the stream when his phone rang. "Jerry, hey man, need to talk to you," his old boss said, his tone unexpectedly friendly. Jerry frowned. "What now?" he thought. "Remember that fencing job you set up for Sam Martin in Idaho?" his boss asked. "Yeah," Jerry replied cautiously. "Well, he's got over 4,000 acres, wants fences, 2 barns, and a boundary up to the city limits. Biggest job we've ever had," his boss continued, sounding excited. Jerry's irritation flared. "What's that got to do with me?" "Martin insists on you," his boss explained. "Says he'll hire someone else if you're not in charge." Jerry smirked slightly. "Well, that's nice of him," he said, though he knew he technically wasn't allowed to leave the state. "So, what do you say?" his boss pressed, a note of hope in his voice. Jerry paused, then an idea struck him. "Maybe, what are you offering? How about double commissions?" his boss suggested. "Double?" Jerry repeated, surprised. "Yeah, and back to full-time work," his boss added. "And my salary?" Jerry pushed back. "I didn't even get a chance to explain when I was let go." The boss hesitated, and Jerry could practically hear him calculating. The job would pay 83 cents per half meter for miles of fencing, sheds, and other features, a substantial contract. "All right, agreed," his boss finally conceded. Jerry stopped by the corner store to celebrate with a jar of mixed nuts and a bottle of beer. Beer was off limits, but he didn't care, downing it fast and burying the bottle. At the hearing, the judge gave him a suspicious look, but ultimately granted him permission to cross state lines for work, provided he returned each night. "These charges are serious, Mr. Jacobson. Very serious," the judge said. "But I won't prevent you from working while we await trial. Don't mess this up or you'll be right back in jail. Understood?" "Yes, Your Honor," Jerry managed to say, keeping a straight face. The next day, he set off for Idaho. Sam greeted him warmly with a handshake. Apparently, the news hadn't reached him yet, and Jerry saw no reason to bring it up. "We're planting corn by the creek. South side's got good soil. Need the sheep kept out," Sam said. "Then there's the Angus. They're free range, but with construction popping up, I'm tired of the complaints. We want to keep them on our land." Jerry thought Sam must have a solid fortune by now. By the time they got back to the house, it was nearly 8 p.m., and Jerry knew he had to head back to Oregon by midnight. He hated leaving behind a hot meal and the chance to see Molly, but he had no choice, so he left. Back in Oregon, he called his bail office and got only a voicemail. The next morning, he called as soon as they opened. "You don't have to call every day, just follow the rules, okay?" the person answering snapped. "Understood," Jerry replied, realizing they likely wouldn't be monitoring him unless something triggered their attention. He jumped back into his truck and sped toward the Martin farm. As he pulled up, he noticed Molly sitting on the porch. The moment she saw him, she sprang up, ran inside, and came back moments later, now with a wide-brimmed hat and a basket. She wore cut-off jeans and a t-shirt, her lively steps making it clear she wasn't wearing a bra. "Let's go," she said, climbing into the truck. "Where to?" he asked, starting the engine. "Dad wants me to show you the area by the building site for measurements," she explained. "Everyone else is busy cutting hair today." "Cutting hair?" he repeated, confused. "Yes," she laughed. "The sheep. They'll be at it until dark." It took them over an hour to reach the area. Cattle grazed nearby, unconcerned by their presence. They chatted along the way about all sorts of things, and Jerry couldn't help glancing at her, noticing how her chest moved when they hit bumps. They drove across open fields with only faint ATV tracks as a guide. He thought briefly about how long it had been since he'd been with a woman, but pushed it aside. He was here for work and didn't want to upset her family. They came to a high ridge overlooking a river with a row of 3-story buildings about half a mile away. He noticed a busy highway in the distance. Progress, he thought, noticing the mix of nature and modern development. He saw the problem right away. Grazing animals near a residential area would cause issues. "The fence needs to go about 50 feet from those buildings and run to the city limits. Thankfully, we own the riverbanks on both sides," he said, half to himself and half to Molly. Switching to 4-wheel drive, he drove along the fence line, using the speedometer to calculate distance. Once back at the main house, he sat down to calculate the measurements. This project would take the entire crew weeks to complete. As Jerry finished up, he looked up to see Molly sitting cross-legged nearby, swinging one leg and letting her shoe dangle. "Everyone's still down at the lower barn," Molly said with a grin. "They won't be back for a while. Want to go upstairs?" Jerry felt his face flush at her boldness. I can't," he stammered. "I'm married. Well, we're separated, but I barely know you." Molly glanced at his hand, surprised. "Oh, I didn't know. You're not wearing a ring. Are you getting divorced?" "Most likely. Actually, yeah, I'm certain." Her curiosity was piqued. "So, you didn't get along? What happened?" Jerry hesitated, then admitted, "Well, I shot her." Molly's eyebrows shot up. "You what?" "I shot her and her lover. They were at my house, in my bed." "Oh, I see," Molly replied, clearly taken aback but managing not to look visibly shocked. "I guess I can't blame you. Did they survive?" "Yeah," Jerry replied quietly. "Well, that's something," she said with a small smile. "Sounds like you've got a lot going on." Jerry nodded, deciding to tell her the full story. She listened closely, taking it all in. When he finished, Molly looked thoughtful. "So that's why you had to rush back to Oregon last night?" "Yeah, for the trial. I'll probably end up in prison," he said, looking down. Molly studied him for a moment. "Maybe not," she replied softly. "What if I came with you?" "With me?" Jerry asked, caught off guard. "Yes, to Oregon. I'm not afraid of you, Jerry. You seem like a good man, the only one I've felt this way about. I love it here, but sometimes I feel isolated." Most of the men around here are either too old or already taken. Jerry raised an eyebrow. And your parents? Wouldn't they be upset if you just... Molly chuckled. Dad actually suggested I rope you in. Said you seemed like a good investment. He's never said that about anyone before. When I was dating someone else, he told me the guy wasn't worth it. I don't think he realizes you're still technically married, or he wouldn't have encouraged it. He's a bit old-fashioned. This is unexpected, Jerry said, trying to process her words. I'm not exactly inexperienced, you know. I've only been with one guy, but I know what I want. And if we're together, I'd never betray you. I know what you're capable of if I did, she added with a playful laugh. Jerry didn't have to think long. What will we tell your parents? He asked. Oh, come on, she said, taking his hand and leading him toward the lower barn. Why explain anything? As they neared, they saw about a dozen men working with the sheep. Mr. Martin looked up, saw them holding hands, and grinned. Dad, Jerry and I are heading out. We'll be back by morning, okay? She called casually. All right, honey. Have fun, he replied with a knowing smile, then turned back to his work. Jerry blinked, still taken aback by her straightforwardness, but Molly just smiled. Dad and Mom are farmers. They know all about life. Zex, love, it's all part of it, she laughed, amused at his reaction. Jerry wasn't sure what to say. He'd never met anyone like her, and she clearly wanted to be with him, without hesitation or judgment. On the way to the motel, Jerry managed to mostly stay within the speed limit, though it was hard with Molly sitting beside him, her shirt slipping off her shoulders. As soon as they hit the open highway, she pulled her t-shirt over her head. His first impression had been right. She was stunning. He even started slowing down, but Molly stopped him. The first time should be in bed. By the time we get there, you'll be ready, she teased, running her hand down his leg. At one point, he asked her to put her shirt back on because he couldn't focus on driving. A trucker noticed her and honked, and she laughed, saying, I'm making his day. Jerry muttered, God help me, under his breath. After a few more miles, he asked her to cover up before she caused an accident, and she obligingly put her shirt back on. They arrived at the motel in record time. When they entered the room, Molly still had her shirt on, but as soon as the door closed, she tossed it aside. Jerry, used to making love with Shelley, found this was different. Molly didn't just want him. She needed him, practically pulling him toward her before he even had his pants off. Her body was slimmer in the waist and hips, with firm, youthful curves, and they spent most of the night exploring each other. Around 11 the next morning, while she was on the phone with her father, Jerry asked, What did he say? He just laughed, she said, crawling back onto the bed. They spent the rest of the day absorbed in each other. By that evening, Jerry realized he was in love with her. He barely knew her, but that didn't matter. He wanted her. Over dinner at a small local cafe, he told her. So you're saying it's just us? She asked, her expression serious. Yes, I want you to be mine, he said, feeling it completely. Wow, she replied, looking shy for the first time. Honestly, I thought you just wanted some fun. Dad thinks you're a good choice. That's how he sees things, she added with a smile. Jerry was a bit surprised, but she laughed it off. You're wonderful. But where will we live? She asked, turning serious again. I don't know, he admitted, realizing he hadn't thought that far ahead. Well, you've got a job and a truck. That's enough to start. Let's just see what happens. If I commit, it'll be forever, she said with a warm smile. Molly, I'm falling in love with you, he told her. Not now, she replied gently but firmly. I like being with you, but I'm not sure yet. Relax, Jerry. For now, no one will touch me but you. And if I decide this isn't for me, you won't touch me again. Deal? Deal, he agreed, his face serious. She was right. They needed time. All right, now let's get back to the motel, she said with a grin. The next day, Jerry finished his measurements and contracts and met with Sam and Dottie to review the plans. They made a few small changes, Sam signed, and shook Jerry's hand. A few minutes later, Molly came out with 2 suitcases. Her parents looked at her in surprise, then at Jerry. I'm going with Jerry, she said firmly. For the first time, Jerry saw the smile disappear from Dottie's face, though she hid it quickly. Sam stood, hugged Molly, and turned to Jerry, his expression more serious than Jerry had ever seen. You've got a lot on your plate, son. You need to settle it, he said firmly. At that moment, Jerry realized Sam knew more than he'd let on. Jerry nodded, taking his words to heart. Molly's not going anywhere, Sam continued. You need to settle things with your wife first. There's no way you two can start a life otherwise. Jerry knew he was right. He saw Molly's shoulders slump. She was so young and impulsive, but her father's wisdom clearly sank in. After dinner, Jerry shook hands with everyone and hugged Molly for a long time. "I'll be back as soon as I can," he promised. "It's all right, Jerry. I'll wait." "I need to know too," she said, tears in her eyes as he climbed into his truck. The drive back felt endless. Jerry didn't want to return now. He knew exactly where he wanted to be. The legal process was dragging on, and there were moments when he almost forgot what he faced. Work didn't fully distract him. On weekends, he made the long drive to see Molly. Sam and Dottie welcomed him, indifferent to the fact that he and Molly retreated to her room for the night. After a few weeks, he felt almost part of the family. He'd even put on some weight, hard to avoid with Dottie's cooking. Every lunch was a feast. He learned that Molly, a quick learner, was becoming a good cook herself. She was also a natural on the ranch. Once, he watched her handle a large calf that had injured itself and was panicking. As it thrashed, he grabbed its tail, only to be dragged around while Molly laughed at his clumsy attempts. He managed to slow it down, and Molly ducked under its tail, grabbed its front leg, and used her weight to wrestle it to the ground. She quickly tied its hind legs with rope, and the calf, now subdued, let out a defeated bleat. Then its mother charged toward them, furious. Jerry instinctively prepared to run, but Molly stood her ground, so he stayed too. Molly tossed Jerry a flimsy stick, and he hesitated, wondering what he was supposed to do with it. The cow lowered her head, snorting and kicking up dirt with her hooves. Molly calmly poked her in the face with the stick, stopping her in her tracks. Jerry did the same when the cow turned toward him. Together they drove the cow away, shut the gate, and went back to the calf. Molly expertly stitched up a cut on its shoulder blade. It looked like it had snagged on a wire. She applied some ointment from her ATV and let the calf go. It stood for a moment, head down and mouth drooling. Once they opened the gate, the cow rushed over, immediately starting to nurse her calf. "Well, it'll be fine," Molly said with a grin. "That cow wanted to liquidate me," Jerry muttered. "Yeah, but she was just protecting her calf. Cows are easy to manage. They're actually pretty dumb. It's the sheep that give us all the trouble," she laughed. Jerry had already seen some of the sheep. He inspected a hole in the fence a bit more closely, then widened it just enough for the animals to crawl through. Within moments, the entire flock had slipped to the other side. When he helped herd them back into the pen, there was a chute inside the barn where they lined up for shearing, one by one. As soon as all the sheep were in, Jerry locked the gate. He walked away, but one big sheep came over, inspected the latch, lifted her nose, and tossed it back, swinging the gate wide open. The whole flock streamed out into the open field again. The chaos stirred two border collies into action. They raced out, circled the flock, and froze, staring down the sheep. The flock paused, staring back, until one looked away. Instantly, the sheep turned and shuffled back into the pen. Molly walked over, set the latch, then pulled the chain bolt up and secured it. "They know all the tricks," she laughed. Jerry looked at the two dogs and could have sworn they were giving him a disapproving look. This routine continued for weeks as he traveled to the ranch and helped with various chores. Sam and Dottie kept an eye on him, and he knew it, but he enjoyed the work. For a time, he almost forgot his real-world troubles, immersed in this life so different from his own. Reality hit each time he unlocked the door to his tiny apartment back in town. One day, his phone rang. He was surprised to hear Shelley's voice, since they hadn't been in contact. "How are you, Jerry?" she asked. He assumed she wanted to discuss their divorce, but there wasn't much left to say. She'd already been evicted from their house, which was now on the market. Jerry doubted it would sell quickly, and even if it did, there wasn't much money involved. "I'm fine. What do you want?" he replied. "I just wanted to thank you for not fighting me over alimony," she said. Jerry chuckled to himself. The court had ordered him to pay a hefty sum, and his lawyer had even hinted that it might have been less if he hadn't gone back to work. Shelley had put her job on hold to recover from her injuries, and Jerry knew she was milking it. Still, he'd paid up. He hadn't had a choice. "I also wanted you to know I forgive you," Shelley said suddenly. "What?" Jerry replied, caught off guard. "I forgive you. I know you were angry and didn't mean to hurt me," she continued. Jerry stared at her, incredulous. "You've got to be kidding me." "No, I'm serious," Shelley insisted. "I still love you. I was thinking, maybe we could go out for dinner and talk." Jerry recognized that familiar tone in her voice, a hint of her old persuasion tactics. After a pause, he shook his head. "That's not a good idea." "Of course it is. We can have a nice evening, just like before. I'll even wear something you like, maybe without anything underneath," she added seductively. "I miss you." Shelley's voice took on a sultry tone, clearly intended to provoke him. And it worked. Shelley, you were the one who cheated on me. I'm not going on a date with you, Jerry snapped. Oh, don't be like that. I'm just trying to make peace. I told you I forgive you. I know you didn't mean it, she replied. Mean what? None of this is my fault. Honestly, I should have eliminated you both. And you forgive me? Jerry's anger finally boiled over. Shelley's tone turned icy. Art does things to me you couldn't even imagine. Then there was silence on the line, which only made his anger flare hotter. I should just come over and finish this mess, he shouted, seething. Just before the line went dead, he thought he heard a muffled sound in the background. What was that? He wondered, still simmering with rage. A short while later, 3 officers arrived, handcuffed him, and took him back to his cell. The situation felt absurd. His lawyer arrived, looking exasperated. Why did you threaten her? I didn't really threaten her, Jerry protested. She provoked me. She called and said she forgave me, the woman who cheated on me. She's insane. Well, they recorded you threatening her and Barnes, which violates the restraining order, his lawyer said firmly. But she called me, Jerry insisted. They're saying otherwise. They? Jerry's eyes narrowed. You mean Barnes was there too? Apparently, his lawyer confirmed. Jerry sighed, finally realizing that this was exactly the trap they'd set for him. His lawyer played a short recording. It was only Jerry's angry shouting after Shelley's pleasant invitation to dinner. They've edited this, Jerry told his lawyer, feeling despair settle over him. Maybe, but it doesn't look good, the lawyer replied. The old judge looked at Jerry with a scowl before shaking his head. Only a portion of the recording was presented in court. Shelley's voice sounded calm, as if she were genuinely seeking reconciliation, while Jerry's came across as furious and unhinged. This man is a danger to be left free, the prosecutor argued. It's clear this is a setup against my client, Jerry's lawyer countered. He's suffered immensely. His wife cheated on him with Mr. Barnes, and they're using this against him out of spite. But your client made the threat, the judge responded simply, and there's no proof of an affair either. Jerry was back in a cell. Days turned into weeks, then a month. His lawyer visited a few times to provide updates. Then one day, a young woman introduced herself as Carrie Anderson, a lawyer. I don't think I can afford another attorney, Jerry said, defeated. Lucky for you, you have friends. I'm taking this on pro bono, and there's a team helping, she said with a smile. Friends? Jerry asked, confused. Yes, Sam Martin and his wife. Oh, and a message for you. A good breeding bull, she added, amused. Jerry chuckled, finally understanding. Art Barnes might have power in his town, but he couldn't control everyone. Soon, they gathered hard proof that the tape had been altered. Tracing Jerry's cell records showed that the call had come from Art Barnes's office. Just 3 days later, Jerry was released on bail. The first thing he did was pick up his truck and head to Idaho. Molly ran to him, nearly knocking him over with a hug. Sam and Dottie stood on the porch, smiling. Thank you both. But why did you do this for me? He asked. Not for you, Molly, Sam grinned. That night, Jerry told them the whole story, something he hadn't done before, though Molly already knew bits and pieces. As they listened, Jerry felt a peace settle over him. That night, lying beside Molly, holding her close, he felt at home. I'm ready, she whispered. Jerry smiled, knowing Molly was truly his. A month later, the trial began. The judge was different, older, but just as stern. Things went as Jerry expected. Both Barnes and Shelley testified that they'd been having a routine business meeting, with Shelley stepping into her private bathroom to freshen up after a long day. They claimed Jerry stormed in and started shooting, but Jerry's team pointed out that this took place at 2 a.m. in Shelley's bedroom. The prosecution even showed a diagram with Barnes sitting on the bed, reading. Jerry's team argued that, as far as Jerry knew, Barnes could have been a robber or even a carnivore. The jury exchanged glances. When Shelley testified again, she continued to deny any affair. Then photos surfaced showing her and Barnes in compromising situations. Jerry had seen these pictures before, taken by a reputable detective after both had left the hospital. In the images, Barnes, who had been shot in the groin, seemed to be recovering quite well. Shelley's composure shattered as the photos were displayed. Art Barnes's wife stood up yelling, "You fool!" before storming out, leaving Barnes looking miserable. Objection! The prosecution tried, but the judge remained indifferent. More photos displayed the crime scene. The disheveled bed, a magazine lying next to Shelley. During a break, Carrie leaned in and confided to Jerry that the case was nearly wrapped up, except for one sticking point. What's that? Jerry asked quietly. You shot your wife, Carrie replied. Barnes was self-defense, but shooting her is harder to justify. So, what's the plan? We could argue it was a crime of passion, an uncontrollable fit of rage, but temporary insanity isn't an option at this point. Jerry considered this. What if I just tell the truth? Carrie raised an eyebrow. And what would you say? She drove me crazy, he admitted. That could lead to an attack charge, Carrie warned. You understand that? Yes, Jerry replied firmly, but it's the truth. When the verdict was read, the foreman announced, not guilty on the first charge. Guilty. The courtroom fell silent as Jerry noticed Barnes and Shelley's absence. The judge sighed, looking at him. Son, you can't just go around shooting people, no matter how justified you feel, he said, shaking his head. At least no one died. That's something. Laughter rippled through the room. Order, the judge said, banging his gavel. 5 years with time served and probation. He stood, leaving without a glance back. Jerry hugged Carrie and looked over to see Molly, smiling through her tears. Outside, the sun was shining as he walked out, hand in hand with her. A few days later, at the final divorce hearing, Shelley was absent, and her alimony claim was dropped. As they left, the sun was shining brightly. Driving back to Idaho in his big Dodge, Molly leaned back, her blouse unbuttoned, soaking up the morning light. There's a truck nearby, Jerry warned, glancing over his shoulder. I don't care. Let him look if he wants to, Molly laughed, enjoying the sunshine. You don't mind, do you? They continued driving, a long incline gradually blocking the trucker's view. So what about a wedding? Molly asked suddenly. Jerry shrugged. I don't mind. Do you want to? Of course I do, she teased. Besides, you should want it too. Oh yeah? And why's that? We didn't exactly use any protection, she replied with a mischievous grin. Jerry's eyes widened. Wait, is that what you meant when you said you were ready? Yes, that's what I meant, she replied, laughing. Any objections? My dad has a tool, you know, she joked, her eyes sparkling. He won't need it, Jerry said, grinning back. When they returned to the ranch, Molly turned to him. Let's head down to the stream. What for? He asked, curious. So I can give you a proper homecoming, she winked. Sam and Dottie waved as they headed down the hill toward the creek. By the grassy bank, she slipped out of her clothes, and they shared a tender embrace, listening to the birds and the gentle flow of the stream. As they lay together, they heard a distant bull's bellow. Jerry tilted his head back and mimicked the sound. Molly laughed. You've got a lot of practice to do. Maybe somewhere else? He asked, smiling. You're perfect, she whispered. Laughing, they dressed and walked back to the house. For the first time, Jerry felt he was truly home. Jerry Jacobson's life took on a slower, steadier rhythm at the Martin Ranch. In the months following his trial, he fully immersed himself in the work and routine of ranch life. The vast Idaho fields provided him with an unexpected kind of peace, a sanctuary of open skies and winding creeks, far from the troubles he left behind. Each morning he rose before dawn, feeling the cool, crisp air as he worked alongside Sam and the others. The work was hard but satisfying, his hands shaping new fences, corrals, and sheds, as if each hammer's strike was building the life he'd long sought but never truly found. Molly was always by his side. Over time, her gentle humor and unwavering support reminded him of what it meant to share life with someone who was his equal in spirit. Her laughter, ringing across the fields, was often the last sound he heard before he closed his eyes each night. Together, they developed a rhythm. Mornings filled with work, afternoons with laughter, and evenings often spent stargazing, wrapped in each other's embrace. The small shared moments became a reminder that love didn't have to be a storm of intensity. It could be the gentle presence of someone who stood by you, even when life went sideways. Jerry was learning that love wasn't always flashy or new, but something that settled into your bones and made you feel whole. Eventually, the memory of his past life faded, replaced by the countless tasks and simple pleasures of ranch work. But Jerry kept close to Sam's words, take care of what's real. That became his new motto. He learned to let go of the bitterness that once consumed him, and with Molly's steadfast presence, he found a sense of peace that had once seemed unreachable. One autumn evening, as they were bringing in the last of the cattle, Molly turned to him, her eyes bright with excitement. Do you ever think we'll have our own ranch, Jerry? She asked, her voice soft but full of hope. Jerry paused, considering the life they were building together. I think we will, he replied, smiling at her. One day we'll make our own little piece of paradise. He looked at her, feeling the warmth of a promise that needed no words. As the years passed, Jerry's life with Molly blossomed in unexpected ways. The Jacobsons became a beloved part of the community, known for their hospitality, resilience, and commitment to family and friends. And though Jerry's journey had been marked by hardship, he now knew that he had found his way home. In the quiet moments, he would sometimes think back to the man he once was, the anger and suspicion that had fueled his actions, and he felt grateful that he had left that man behind. The future stretched out before him, as open as the Idaho skies, filled with endless possibilities. A future shaped by the work of his hands, the strength of his heart, and the enduring love that had, against all odds, given him a second chance.